Blood trailed down the edge of the porcelain sink. Jason didn't flinch. His knuckles throbbed. The faucet was still dripping, steady, taunting. Behind him, the crowd howled, not in fear but in laughter. They were all watching. He didn't turn. Inmate 542 shouted across the corridor, "Tell the limper to scrub harder." Another voice cackled, "He's polishing that drain like it owes him money." The guards didn't stop them. They leaned, arms folded, amused. Jason's bucket tipped over behind him. Soap water mixed with the blood from his hand. Still, he kept scrubbing, but the motion had changed. Slower, measured. Like he was thinking about something else entirely. Down the hall, the cameras buzzed. Static popped on a hidden channel somewhere in the control tower. Someone was watching more than the crowd knew. Well, Jason hadn't always limped. Not in the way most men do from wear or age. His left knee caught a blade years ago, not from a street fight or prison brawl, but from a man who wore a velvet tuxedo and laughed when blood hit his champagne. Jason hadn't screamed then. He wouldn't give them the noise. The limp became a part of him, and people mistook it for weakness. That mistake kept him alive longer than most. He didn't mind being invisible. That's what they wanted. That's why they put him in here. He hadn't spoken to anyone when he arrived 2 months ago. No handshake, no head nods. He just cleaned. Bathrooms, broken plumbing, rusted stairwells, every corner no one else wanted. The guards gave him a mop and assumed that meant obedience. They never looked at his hands. Never saw the way he gripped the mop like a baton. Never noticed that his left shoulder, dislocated twice, reset without anesthesia, still rolled perfectly under pressure. They only saw a poor janitor locked with them under the same prison. Talking of the prison, it was a private one. Off-grid. Some whispered it didn't even exist. It sat on desert land, buried behind solar farms and truck yards. From the outside, it looked like a military supply depot. Inside, it was class warfare at scale. The poor inmates, the ones without backing, influence, or names, lived in the concrete blocks. Shared toilets, cold meals, no windows. The elite inmates. They had carpeted floors, barbers, access to workouts, books, even cigars if you had enough to trade. That level of comfort wasn't bought with money, though. It came with silence, with betrayal, with being a useful monster for the men in suits. Jason had been offered one of those rooms once. A rich man, tall, oily, and smiling through polished teeth, had leaned over and whispered, "You don't have to mop another floor. Just say yes." Jason didn't even blink. He kept mopping. A week later, the guards assigned him to sewage clearance duty. No gloves, no precautions. This seemed like they were teaching him a lesson, but Jason didn't resist or show weakness. He just did his job as usual. However, things changed when the boy arrived. The boy came in on a Thursday, small, twitchy, couldn't have been older than 19. The kind the gang sniffed out early. Jason saw the way they circled him, slow, coiled like wolves who'd found a rabbit with no hole to run to. Jason didn't say a word, just handed him a second sponge and pointed to the sink beside his. They scrubbed together in silence. The boy tried to speak once. Jason didn't look at him, just nodded. That was enough, but people noticed. When the kid was cornered the next night in the shower block, Jason was there, cleaning tiles no one asked him to. He didn't say a word, just leaned against the wall until the gang walked off. The guards didn't step in. They never did when it was people like him. Poor, quiet, disposable. The guards called him Lurch, said it loud in front of others. It was a joke, a walking corpse, a silent freak, a man who looked like he'd already died twice. But one of them started getting nervous. A new officer. He watched Jason like he'd seen him before. He asked questions about his file. Got stonewalled. None of the standard logs existed. Then one night the officer didn't report for duty. His car sat outside the fence for days, covered in sand, engine cold. Jason didn't react, but he noticed the cameras changed. They started tracking different corridors. The thing about Jason was that he never acted first. He waited. He let them treat him like trash. Let them dump on him, ignore him, spit near his shoes, steal his food. All of it built one thing, silence. And silence was better than armor. Because no one suspects the floor they're standing on until they slip. And that slip came earlier than anyone expected. It happened on a Tuesday. One of the guards tossed a plastic food tray at Jason's feet, told him to clean it up. Jason bent slowly, the limp heavier than usual. The crowd was watching. The inmates whispered, then the guard spit. Right at his face. Jason didn't flinch. He wiped his cheek with the same cloth he used for the floor, kept scrubbing, but the boy, he shouted, and that broke the script. The guards grabbed the boy, dragged him down the hall. The laughter returned. Jason stood up, left the mop behind. He limped out of frame. Later, when the guards returned, the hallway lights flickered. Static buzzed overhead. One of the bathroom doors was jammed. Inside, one guard unconscious. Another locked in a stall with his own zip ties. Written on the mirror in industrial cleaner, "Stop watching. Start listening." Jason was in his cell by the time alarms went off, limping, calm. The elite inmate who had offered him comfort months ago, he watched the footage from his private tablet, froze it, zoomed in. His hand trembled. He clicked into a file hidden on his drive. Ashline Unit Archives. He opened Jason's old record. The last line read, "Cleared for internal destruction. Do not engage, do not wake." The hallway hadn't stopped buzzing since the attack. Guards moved like insects, chaotic but predictable. Radios crackled. Boots stomped past Jason's door. None of them dared open it. Not because they were afraid of him, not yet, but because they were still laughing at the wrong man. Jason sat on his bunk, head down, towel over his hands. His shoulders rose slowly with every breath. He wasn't thinking about the guard in the stall or the boy in the showers. He was thinking about the man with the tablet, the one who'd frozen when he saw him walk. He hadn't seen that face in 10 years. Last time they met, Jason had been bleeding in the dirt, a chain around his neck, and that man had leaned down and said, "One more win and you're free." He'd lied. They always did. The boy returned in silence. He walked into the utility corridor where Jason worked and sat down next to a bucket. His lip was split, left cheek purple. He didn't speak. Jason kept twisting the wrench under the sink. Behind the boy, inmates walked past. Not one looked at him. Some had helped hold him down the night before. That's how it worked here. Loyalty was a myth, the kind the rich sold to the poor to keep them quiet. Jason finally handed him a roll of tape. The boy wrapped his ribs, slowly, like he'd done it before. That night, Jason moved without sound. While the rest slept or bartered, he slipped into the maintenance shafts. The limp vanished. His movements were surgical, memorized. He passed under the luxury block, careful not to trigger any pressure sensors in the flooring. In cell L9, the man with the tablet sat reading. A cigar burned on his metal tray. Jason reached the access panel above the room, removed the vent cover and dropped a single item down. A ring. Black steel, scarred. The man didn't touch it, just stared, eyes wide, cigarette trembling. His lips moved silently. Ashline. Ashline wasn't a name. It was a number, a unit, a debt unpaid. 15 years earlier, Jason had been part of it, recruited off the books, no badge, no home. They took men who didn't exist, broke them, rebuilt them, then put them in cages. The wealthy would bet on them, fight nights that never made the news. The losers disappeared. The winners fought again. Jason won, again and again. Until one day he stopped. He was ordered to execute a kid, not in the ring, in real life. A son of a rebel commander. Jason refused. They made sure he didn't leave whole. The limp came from that night. But the damage wasn't just physical. Jason wasn't imprisoned now because he got caught. He was delivered. He allowed it, because some debts need to be paid in person. The prison warden was a man named Darren Cole, ex-military, high clearance. His hands had never touched a mop. His office smelled like cologne and metal polish. He watched the fight, hallway footage from earlier, Jason walking, fire alarms blaring, calm. He didn't call the guards, didn't ask for reports. He whispered one word to his assistant, "Recovering." Jason returned to the duct and crawled deeper than before. He wasn't mapping the prison. He already had the map. He built it months before they ever brought him here. What he needed was access and leverage. He reached a junction above the camera room. 2 guards played cards. A monitor flashed static briefly, then settled. Jason adjusted a relay cable with tweezers pulled from a rag-wrapped pouch. Now he could reroute one feed, just one, enough to hide a movement or a kill. The boy, whose name still hadn't been spoken, found a note under his pillow the next morning. No handwriting, just a code. Vent 15. Midnight. He didn't ask questions. He just went. When the time came, he stood under the vent and waited. Jason lowered a bag. Inside, bandages, protein bars, and a map. The boy looked up, but the vent was already closed. Back in cell L9, the rich inmate stood at the door when lights went out. He wasn't scared for his life. He was scared of memory. He remembered the sound of Jason breaking bone in the ring. He remembered the way the crowd used to cheer. not because Jason fought well but because he didn't speak. He was watching the past return in silence. Jason had been watching him too, not just recently. From the first week, because that man had been the one to sign Jason's final match. The retirement match, the one that was supposed to earn him freedom. Instead, they shattered his kneecap and dumped him in a Venezuelan jungle with nothing but a tracking chip. Jason clawed back. For years, off the grid, underground, anonymous. Until he reached a border checkpoint, saw the name Cole on a document shipment manifest, and began his path back. Warden Cole's voice played softly through the speaker in his office. Pull Jason's cell feed. Archive only. His assistant asked, "Why?" Cole stared at the screen, then tapped a folder. Ashline Resurrection. Because he's not the prisoner, he's the storm. In the poor block, another inmate was dragged out screaming. He tried to steal from the rich tier. Guards beat him in the hallway while others watched. Jason sat in the shadows, taping a broken mop handle together, not to clean with, to measure something: length, distance, reach, because the ring was returning, and this time he was going to set it on fire. The fight was scheduled for 2:00 a.m. It wasn't in a ring, not this time. Just a hallway, one that hadn't seen light in years, deep beneath the prison's foundations. No cameras, no oversight, only whispers and shadows. The elite organized these quietly. No announcements, no spectators from the poor block. Just private feeds broadcast to encrypted servers, where men in suits would sip dark liquor and gamble behind VPN walls. Jason wasn't told, but he showed up because he already knew. 2 guards led him there. Not with force, with silence. They didn't cuff him. Didn't question when he removed his cleaning gloves and folded them neatly before stepping through the service elevator. The boy had followed the map. He was waiting nearby in a vent, hidden, shaking. He didn't know what Jason was doing. He only knew that this man, the limping janitor everyone mocked, had delivered more in 2 weeks than anyone else had in a year. The opponent was tall, too clean to be from general population. Tattoos that didn't belong to gangs, they were marks of private combat units. His arms were veined from injections, not workouts. He smiled when he saw Jason limp into the hallway. "Thought you were dead," he said to no one. Jason didn't speak. He pulled the makeshift mop staff from behind the pipe on the wall, the same one he'd measured. Same one the guards had assumed was trash. He adjusted his footing. The limp vanished. The first strike came from the other man, a forward shoulder roll into a downward elbow. But Jason wasn't there anymore. He slid beneath, used the limp as bait, and drove the mop end into the man's ribs. Crack, no sound from Jason. No showmanship, only movement. The hallway floor was slick from condensation. Jason used it, pushed off at mid-spin, used the momentum to swing low, clipped the man's knee, then follow through with an upward jab under the jaw. The man stumbled back, wiped his mouth. Laughed blood. Above them, in the viewing suite, the rich inmate from L9 stared into his screen, expressionless. Around him, 2 others whispered, men who'd watched Jason break bodies for years and assumed he'd never wake again. They were seeing something else now, not just survival. Purpose. Jason didn't finish the fight quickly. He let it play. He let the viewers lean forward, let them believe he was struggling, that maybe the limp was catching up. And just when the opponent dropped his guard, Jason grabbed the pipe behind him, twisted it free, and slammed it into the man's temple. No camera caught it, but they heard it. The sound of intent. Jason turned to the wall, knocked 3 times. A vent panel popped open. The boy crawled out. Shaking, Jason handed him a key card. The boy stared. Jason nodded toward the door at the far end of the hall, the one labeled Service Room 6B. Inside were servers, power logs, fight records going back 6 years. The boy ran. Jason stayed. Upstairs, Warden Cole received a call. Static at first, then a single word: "He's reactivated." Cole closed the file on his desk, lit a cigar. This facility just became temporary. The elite inmate in L9 received an encrypted message through his tablet. No sender, just one sentence: "The ghost knows your name." He dropped the device, backed into the corner. The ring Jason had dropped earlier still sat on the floor, untouched. As guards scrambled toward the lower block, Jason moved, through the maintenance duct, past the collapsed laundry chute, up through a pipe chamber he'd used for weeks to smuggle food to the boy. He reached his cell before the sirens, sat down. Limp returned. By the time the guards arrived, shouting, Weapons drawn, Jason was asleep on his side, towel over his face, one hand loosely gripping a toilet brush. The boy made it to the server room. Inside, rows of blinking machines filled the space. Surveillance drives, fight footage archives, wire transfer logs. He didn't know what half of it meant, but he pulled 3 drives, slipped them under his shirt, closed the door behind him, and walked back into the dark. Jason didn't need the footage. He needed them to know it wasn't hidden anymore. Later that night, a file was delivered to Warden Cole. It contained stills from the hallway fight and one grainy image: Jason standing over the unconscious opponent, camera shattered beside him. The timestamp was current. Cole folded the printout, whispered again, "Ashline." His assistant asked what it meant. Cole didn't answer. He just stared out the window at the prison yard where the wind had picked up, and in that gust, a cleaning cloth blew across the pavement, white, silent, forgotten, but moving. The wind hadn't stopped since dawn. It whipped through the outer fences like a warning, tearing bits of trash through the razor coils, sending wrappers, paper, and worn rags tumbling across the open concrete yard. Most inmates stayed indoors. The cold didn't bother Jason, not after what he'd endured. He stood still near the chain link, mop in hand, staring at the trash fluttering in the wind like signals. They were moving. He could feel it. The boy didn't know how to look at him anymore. He kept glancing at Jason in the cafeteria line, like someone who'd seen too much but didn't know what it meant. One night you're handed a sponge. 2 weeks later you're crawling through ducts watching a man drop someone twice his size with a mop handle. And now the boy was in the footage. The server logs confirmed it. The cameras caught a glimpse of him slipping into 6B. The fact that he made it out at all meant someone had protected him, someone above ground, which meant Jason was no longer invisible. Upstairs, the rich inmate in L9 stared at a small ring on his desk. He hadn't touched it, hadn't moved it, just stared. His left hand trembled when he poured water now. Something deep in his memory had uncoiled, something he'd locked away when he signed Jason's release match years ago. It wasn't supposed to be possible. They'd buried Jason, not physically. Technologically, psychologically, the file had said, cognitive reset stable, motor function compromised, combat drive suppressed. But that wasn't what walked that hallway last night. What walked was a ghost that remembered everything. The boy had started collecting, not openly. Just small things: a broken screw, a used bandage roll, a bent plastic fork handle. Jason noticed. The boy wasn't stealing. He was mapping the way Jason once did. He was learning. Jason watched him hide a plastic card beneath the rim of a vent grate. Watched him check the guard rotations from the laundry room reflection. Watched him act small when he was learning to be dangerous. It wasn't pride Jason felt. It was warning, because he remembered what that road cost. Warden Cole stood in the admin wing, watching a floor plan of the prison rotate on a digital table. Red zones, blue lines, thermal readings. His assistant said, "The boy's been tracked to level 4A. You want him pulled?" Cole didn't look up. "Not yet." Why? Because Jason didn't stop him. Back in the lower cell blocks, Jason continued his routine. He polished water valves, scrubbed the same stair rail 4 times, replaced light bulbs that didn't need changing. Every movement was muscle memory. Every action had a second purpose. In the laundry room, he pulled back a dryer panel and checked the slip inside. A name was etched in the metal with a dull screw tip. Cole. 2007, a fight year. Jason remembered it. A boy from El Salvador, fast, trained in silence. They pitted him against Jason for a New Year's broadcast. Stakes so high the spectators flew in on private jets. Jason hadn't wanted to fight him. The boy was 17. He was also better. He broke 2 of Jason's ribs before Jason pinned him. They dragged the boy away alive. Jason never saw him again. Now he knew why. Cole had made his bones on that fight. Built a name, a title, a chain of power, and Jason had helped. The boy approached Jason for the first time in days. They were alone in a pipework shaft, the kind no one used except staff. Fluorescent lights hummed. Water dripped overhead. The boy handed Jason a piece of wire, not a message, a question. Jason didn't answer, just nodded toward a steam pipe valve, subtle, low, near a corridor camera junction. If adjusted 2 degrees left, it would fog the lens for 13 seconds. The boy understood, walked away. That night Jason opened the vent above the unused shower block. He hadn't been there since the riot. Since the boy was nearly broken, he stood inside alone, not cleaning. Just standing, breathing. He looked up at the shower heads. Some were cracked. Others dripped. He reached into the wall and pulled out a toothbrush wrapped in a cloth. It wasn't his. It was the El Salvador boy's, left behind the night he disappeared. The bristles were hard. Dried blood at the edge. Jason closed his hand around it, like a memory that hurt more to keep than to forget. Across the compound, a drone hovered in the moonlight, silent, small, civilian, but its camera was military. Inside a black SUV 2 miles away, a man in a jacket stared at the feed. He zoomed in. Jason stood under the showerhead, head bowed. The man whispered, "He's awake." Jason's time was up. He felt it in how the guards watched him now, how they didn't laugh, how their jokes fell short when he walked by. The mop was no longer funny. The limp wasn't weakness anymore. It was camouflage. The boy was waiting outside the utility hall when Jason returned. He had a question in his eyes, not about how or why, but when. Jason didn't speak. He handed him a towel, then knelt, and began wrapping wire around a metal rod the size of a broken curtain rail. Deliberate, precise, silent. The morning after the fight, the boy was moved, not officially. No announcement, no posted schedule, just one less tray handed out during breakfast, one missing shadow from the cleaning roster. Jason noticed immediately, not because the kid was absent, but because everything around him had shifted half an inch. Too quiet, too polite. When things get clean in a dirty place, it means someone important is watching. He kept scrubbing, but his right hand tightened ever so slightly on the steel wool. The kid hadn't been taken to punishment. That wasn't how they worked here, not with the valuable ones. He was moved to the north wing, closer to admin, closer to surveillance, the place where the walls listened more than the guards. It was the kind of move they made when someone had been noticed or recruited. Jason had been there once 2 years ago when he'd first been pulled into the program. They didn't threaten or torture. They offered comfort, solitude, food that wasn't gray. Then they asked questions. What do you remember? Would you like to matter again? Jason hadn't answered then. He didn't plan to now either. Upstairs in the warden's office, Cole stared at the transfer log. Cell 6B cleared. That was the location of the stolen footage. No fingerprints. No camera footage of the boy taking the drives. But the system knew. The system had been watching him even when Jason wasn't, and someone else had flagged it before Cole did. The name was coded, masked. But the access terminal came from outside the prison entirely, which meant Jason wasn't just waking up. He was being tracked. The boy didn't speak during the transfer. The new room was smaller, too clean, single cot, fabric instead of metal sheets, the kind of space designed not for rest but for psychological resets. He sat still for hours. The door didn't lock with a click. It hummed, a sound that came from the walls, not the knob. That's when he knew he was being conditioned. And Jason hadn't told him this part. Back in the utility shaft, Jason returned to the ventilation tunnel. He didn't bring tools, just a sliver of glass and a towel. He moved with control, his limp more pronounced now, a choice. The cameras ignored him again. They'd been told to stand down. He was playing by their script again. That was a mistake. Inside Vent 12, near the admin wing, Jason paused. A single screw was missing from the panel. Not an accident, a signal. He pressed once against the metal, firm, silent. A slip of paper fell out. He caught it midair. It was folded 6 times. Too careful to be random, he unfolded it. The handwriting was neat. I didn't talk, but they want me to listen. I'll wait. It wasn't signed, but Jason didn't need a name. Cole watched the hallway cameras with narrowed eyes. He saw Jason pass through corridor 3, saw the way the guards turned slightly away. Not in fear, in habit. Like they'd already been told to ignore him again. Cole leaned forward. Clicked a feed buried in the archive logs. Camera 9A, the abandoned guard lounge. A second later, Jason's face flickered onto the screen. He looked directly into the lens and smiled. In the north wing, the boy waited. Dinner came in a clean tray. Actual color on the food. A cup of real juice. He didn't eat it. He placed the tray on the floor and stepped back. That's when the speaker behind the mirror activated. "You're observant," said the voice. It wasn't Cole. It wasn't any of the guards. It was someone else. Calm, cold. "We've been watching you for longer than you think." The boy said nothing. Jason returned to the laundry block, acted normal, until he passed an older inmate named Marco. Small, twitchy, known for stealing socks, but Jason caught something under his sleeve, a shadow of ink. Fresh. Not prison-made. Jason stopped, pulled Marco into a side room, locked the door, lifted the sleeve. The tattoo was real, black triangle. Ashline sigil. Marco began to tremble. "Please," he whispered. "They said I had to watch him, that's all." Jason didn't hit him, didn't threaten him. He simply stared, until Marco dropped to his knees and said, "They're calling it a second phase. You're not the only one." They woke up. Later that night, Jason moved to the stairwell near admin. He sat on the steps like he was just resting, but under his shoe was a circuit chip. Torn from the laundry scanner, he pressed it into the wall. A tiny red light blinked once, then turned green. Above him, the light bulb flickered and went out. He was in the surveillance room. One of the techs leaned back in his chair. He never saw the data line shift. Never saw Jason vanish off the feed. Never saw the hallway camera reverse its loop and replay 20 seconds on delay. Jason was already past it, already through the side door, already headed toward whatever the boy was walking into. The hall outside the administrative block was silent. Too silent. Jason moved like he had before, every step calculated, every glance a tool. The chip he'd planted in the stairwell had bought him 40 seconds of blindness on the cameras, maybe 45 if the technician was distracted. It wasn't much, but it didn't need to be. He wasn't here to save the boy. He was here to see what they were doing to him. In the white room, the boy hadn't touched his food. The speaker crackled again, but this time it wasn't a stranger's voice. It was a man he recognized, not because they'd met, but because the voice had been on the tapes he stole. "The fight tapes. You've shown promise," the voice said. "Jason didn't get this far by waiting, neither will you. No commands, just tone. Instruction embedded in flattery. Psychological precision." And the boy's face gave it away, not fear, not defiance, confusion. It was working. Jason bypassed the hallway scanner by using the metal rod he'd wrapped earlier to create a magnetic echo in the sensor field. An old Ashline trick, useful, silent, and not traceable unless someone was looking for it. They weren't. Inside the room across the hall, Jason crouched. Behind the one-way mirror, he could see the boy's shoulders tense. He wasn't breaking, but he was bending. Fast. Jason moved slowly. Didn't speak. He placed a small black square on the corner of the mirror, flat, silent, magnetic, then backed into the crawlspace behind the vent system. A second later, the mirror glitched. The voice paused. Jason listened. "You know he was trained to forget, right?" the voice said. It wasn't directed at the boy anymore. It was toward the room itself. They knew Jason was listening. "You think he remembers what he was made to do, but the memories aren't real. Not all of them. We only left enough to keep him angry." Jason's breathing didn't change. But his hand flexed once against the metal duct wall. In the hallway, a guard passed, didn't look up, didn't see the crawl door shift shut just seconds before he arrived. The boy tilted his head slightly. It was subtle, but Jason saw it, a signal. The kid knew he wasn't alone. Back in the surveillance room, the technician caught something unusual. A motion signature in the admin wing duct system. No alert had been triggered, just an anomaly in the airflow readings. He clicked into the feed, saw nothing. Because Jason had already looped that feed 10 minutes earlier, the loop showed nothing. And that was the most dangerous thing a system can miss. Jason was back in the laundry by morning, same mop, same limp. The boy returned to the lower block before lunch. No fanfare, no new bruises. Just a slightly different posture. He walked like someone who'd been told the truth, but didn't yet believe it. Jason waited until the shift changed before approaching. They met by the tool locker. Neither spoke. Jason handed him the cleaning schedule. The boy flipped it over. On the back, a single map, 3 halls, 1 destination, a room marked only with a letter, H. Inside that room, 3 levels below admin, sat a steel chair bolted to the floor. Leather straps hung loose on the arms. A ring of lights encircled it from the ceiling above. There was no dust. It hadn't been abandoned, just waiting. Elsewhere in the facility, a man arrived by helicopter. Not a guard. Not military. Dressed in civilian clothes too perfect to be accidental, navy jacket, black shoes with no laces, and a small earpiece tucked beneath a streak of silver hair. Warden Cole met him without a handshake. "Langley," he said. Langley didn't answer, just nodded toward the building. "Bring him in. I want to see if the weapon still breathes." That night the lights flickered in cell block D, not everywhere, just above Jason's cell, for exactly 11 seconds. Long enough for a message to be delivered. Long enough for the boy to reach the lower maintenance shaft. long enough for Jason to be waiting there with a question neither of them knew how to ask, because the letter H wasn't a room, it was a person, and they were still alive. Langley didn't speak as the wind tore across the helipad. He adjusted the cuffs of his jacket, brushed off imaginary dust, and walked down the concrete steps like he already owned the place. His eyes didn't search. They scanned, the walk of a man who'd walked darker hallways before and survived all of them. Warden Cole followed without a word. He didn't need to explain anything to Langley. Langley already knew. Jason Statham stood inside the janitor's closet, door closed, both hands resting on the mop handle like it was a weapon in disguise. His breathing was calm, his face unreadable, but his back was straight. The limp had vanished again. He could feel it in the walls. The rhythm had changed. There was no new announcement, no sirens, no lockdown, but something had entered the system. Jason Statham had been trained to hear it, not with his ears, but in the way the fluorescent lights hesitated half a second longer when someone powerful walked underneath them. Langley was here. The boy had found the name. It wasn't written in a file. It wasn't left on a note. It was scratched into the back of a metal mirror in the hidden room beneath the admin wing, just one word, Langley, and 3 digits below it. H01, not a room, a subject number. The boy didn't fully understand what it meant, but Jason Statham did. He'd been H02. Langley's first stop wasn't the warden's office. It was the security wing. He stepped inside and the tech stood without being told. He removed his coat slowly, hung it on the back of a chair that wasn't his, then walked to the main monitor, pointed to a cell block. "Show me Statham," he said, the tech typed. A camera feed flickered. Jason Statham appeared on his knees mopping a hallway, but Langley didn't smile, because Jason Statham was looking directly into the camera. In the lower block, Jason Statham stood up, quietly. Left the mop leaning against the wall. The guards didn't stop him. They were used to the routine now. They didn't know he was already off script. He passed by the mess hall, saw the boy sitting alone. Jason Statham gave no signal. But the boy stood up 2 minutes later and followed the janitorial route to the back corridors. They would not meet yet, only orbit. Because Langley was watching back in the surveillance room, Langley watched a second feed, one no one else knew existed, infrared. Buried under the main feeds, designed only for internal assets, it showed Jason Statham's heat signature. The boy's too. Langley tilted his head. "I trained him better than that," he muttered. Warden Cole raised an eyebrow. "He's been unstable." Langley didn't blink. "No. He's been remembering." Years ago, in the deep training compound in northern Sumatra, Langley had taken 6 ghosts and turned them into monsters. They were never given ranks, only initials. Jason Statham had been the only one who disobeyed. The others became contract enforcers, private ghosts, kill switches in cities that never made the news. Jason Statham disappeared. Now he was back, and if he was here, he was after something buried. Jason Statham returned to his cell, closed the door, and opened the vent behind the lower bunk. Inside, he pulled out a set of folded diagrams. The hidden room, the one with the chair, had been one of many. But there was another room, one they never showed him. He traced a line with his finger, behind the laundry tunnel, below the sub-basement, unlabeled. But there was a tag, reintegration. Jason Statham's jaw flexed once, then he folded the map. That night the boy received another tray of colored food, but this time there was something under the cup, a slip of laminated paper, coordinates. He looked up at the mirror. No red light this time, just reflection. Langley sat across from Warden Cole in the office, poured a glass of water, sipped once, then said, "If we don't contain Statham in 72 hours, everything we built gets exposed." Cole nodded slowly. "We thought he was done." Langley turned to the window. "Ghosts don't die. They get quiet, and then they wait." Jason Statham opened the old crawlspace between the HVAC line and the disused filing corridor. He pulled out a box, small, wrapped in grease-stained cloth. Inside was a watch, still ticking. Not because it told time, but because it held a coded memory burst, something recorded during his final mission before the fracture. He pressed the dial. The watch blinked once. A single projection displayed across the wall, grainy, distorted but clear enough. Langley. Standing over a chair, a voice behind the camera saying, "Proceed with memory excision." Jason Statham closed the watch, and for the first time in weeks, he allowed his jaw to clench. The lights in the lower cell block dimmed for exactly 9 seconds. It wasn't a power fault. It wasn't an error. It was a test. Langley wanted to see how Jason Statham would move when he thought no one was watching. But Jason didn't move. He stayed seated on his bunk, flipping through a torn maintenance manual, pretending to study an outdated water pump system. His eyes, however, never left the wall, because behind that wall, under a 3-inch sheet of concrete and rusted pipe, was the first room that ever broke him. Room H02. Langley didn't walk the compound like the others. He floated through it. Guards stepped aside, not because they were ordered to, but because the weight in the air shifted when he passed. Like the room had less oxygen. He didn't carry a weapon. He didn't wear a badge, but everyone who saw him recognized something primal in the silence that followed him. It wasn't respect. It was memory. In the admin corridor, Langley paused beside a security monitor displaying thermal overlays. Jason Statham's heat signature hadn't moved in over 20 minutes still. Patient. Langley smirked. He's remembering everything I taught him. Jason Statham knew better. He wasn't still because he was stuck. He was still because the boy had started moving. And right now, that mattered more. The boy had followed the coordinates from the laminated strip under his tray. They led him through a drain shaft, 2 electrical crawlways, and finally to a sub-basement door that looked like it hadn't opened in years. But the lock blinked green when he approached, because Jason Statham had already been here, weeks ago, before the riot, before the fight. Before anyone realized he was awake, inside the chamber was silence. A single folding chair, a wall of old storage crates, and one object on the ground, a headset, small, padded, too clean to be abandoned. The boy hesitated, then slipped the headset over his ears, at first static. Then Jason Statham's voice, not live, recorded. If you're hearing this, they're watching you already. Don't flinch, don't ask questions, just listen. The boy froze. This place isn't what they said. It's not a prison. It's a sorting house. They don't want your silence. They want your loyalty. Outside the chamber, a security light flickered. Langley entered the warden's office without knocking. Cole didn't stand. Langley leaned over the desk and placed a photograph on the wood-grain surface. Grainy. Old Jason Statham. Younger. Standing beside a collapsed building in the middle of a burned-out jungle. Langley tapped the image once. He buried a data core there. We never found it. Cole raised an eyebrow. You think he came back for it? Langley shook his head. He came back for the memory of it. Jason Statham finally stood from his bunk, left the manual open, crossed to the far corner of the cell, knelt, pressed 3 fingers to the wall. 1 second, 2, 3, a quiet click, a sliver of paneling opened inside. Not a weapon, not tools, just a photo of 5 men. All in military-grade desert fatigues. All grinning, all marked H units. One of them, the one on the far right, was Langley. The boy listened as Jason Statham's voice continued. If you ever see him, don't engage, don't run. Just act like you're too stupid to matter. Outside the door, a metal footstep landed. The boy paused the playback, held his breath. Langley had gone quiet, standing in the old observation bay, his hands behind his back. He stared into the interrogation suite. The chair below still had dried blood under its base. A small stain. Missed during cleanup. He leaned toward the intercom, whispered, "Subject H02, a beat." Then the lights flickered again. Jason Statham moved quick, through the vent under his bunk, into the drainage access, past the blind spot in the outer camera loop. His body flowed with exact control. No limp, no sound, not hesitation. Memory. He arrived at the chamber seconds after the boy killed the feed. Their eyes met. Jason Statham didn't ask what he heard, didn't need to. The boy handed him the headset. Jason Statham nodded once. Then placed a new object in the boy's hand, a black capsule, cold, metal, thumb-sized. Only if they try to take you. Langley was already watching the chamber from the main surveillance hub, but the cameras showed nothing, just static. A perfect feed blackout, looped back 63 seconds and folded into itself. Langley stared at the blank screen. He didn't blink. He just whispered. He remembers how to erase himself. Back in the chamber, Jason Statham cracked open a crate. Inside, plastic containers, broken wires, expired meds. Then a photo folded, yellowed. He opened it slowly. It was him, and another man, Langley, not in uniform, in suits, smiling. At a round table on the back, handwritten letters. "We'll never need chains. You'll stay because you believe it." Jason Statham stared at it, then burned it with a lighter pulled from a hidden wall crease. watched it curl into ash. Langley stood alone in the underground archive vault, a room so cold the floor sweated ice. Before him, a set of sealed crates, each tagged with red wire seals and long-forgotten mission codes, ones that never made the official logs. He moved slowly, pulling a crate open with bare hands. Inside, a file folder wrapped in Kevlar labeled simply H02, reintegration failure. Langley flipped it open. Inside was a single photo of Jason Statham, no caption, no intel, just a red stamp at the bottom corner, unresolved. Jason Statham moved through the vent systems with clinical precision, every muscle calculated, every footstep deliberate. He wasn't hiding, he was returning, not to escape but to retrace the full path of his collapse. Upstairs, the boy had returned to his cell, but his rhythm had changed. He wasn't eating, wasn't moving, wasn't reacting. The guards didn't notice, but Langley did, because it was the exact pattern Jason Statham had shown years ago, 36 hours before he activated for the first time. Langley leaned into the surveillance mic and said nothing. Sometimes silence was louder than commands. Jason Statham dropped into the sub-basement corridor, landing silently between two rusted valve consoles. To his left, a sealed medical bay. To his right, a metal wall with no doors, no hinges. But he wasn't looking for a door. He was looking for a panel. He found it under the dust. 3 horizontal lines carved into steel, the old ghost unit symbol. Jason Statham pressed his palm against it. The wall hissed open. Inside, cold air, motionless, and she didn't look up right away. The woman stood at a steel table cleaning surgical tools. Her white coat was stained at the wrists. Her hair was tied back tightly, the same way it had been in the training camp compound. Jason Statham stepped in slowly. She finally looked at him, didn't speak, didn't blink, just stared. She'd once gone by Dr. Cora Miles, but in this place everyone had dropped their names. She was simply H01. Back in the upper block, Langley entered the observation room and pulled the lever to lock down the lower basement. The alarms didn't blare. The lockdown was silent. Jason Statham was now sealed inside with a ghost of his past. Langley whispered, "Let's see what he remembers." Dr. Miles finally spoke. "You weren't supposed to survive it." Jason Statham said nothing. She gestured toward a chair near the table. He didn't sit. Instead, he reached into the folds of his shirt and pulled out a folded piece of cloth, dark, old, stained. Inside it, a rusted dog tag, H03. She flinched. Jason Statham laid it on the table. "Langley sent them to fail," she said after a moment. Jason Statham nodded once. "He's rewriting the files," she added. "Erasing the unit, claiming we were unstable." Jason Statham didn't argue, because he had already seen the redacted versions in Langley's file room. Meanwhile, the boy wasn't sleeping. He was counting seconds, patterns, power fluctuations. Jason Statham had taught him not to fight the system, but to listen to it. And right now, the system was humming unevenly. The East Wing was powering down. Something was being hidden. Langley entered the old interrogation chamber, stood alone beneath the flickering overhead lights. On the floor, a single chair bolted down, leather straps intact. He walked to it, crouched, ran his fingers along a crack in the armrest, then smiled to himself. Jason Statham had once broken that strap with a dislocated wrist. In the hidden medical bay, Dr. Miles opened a drawer. Inside, 3 vials. She picked one up, held it to the light. "Everything they used to wipe your memory," she said. "Still here, still burning." Jason Statham didn't touch it. Instead, he pulled out a fragment of data core from his coat lining. She inhaled sharply. "That's the last key." Jason Statham nodded once, then handed it to her. Langley knew the timing now. He watched the backup power grid flare in corridor H3, exactly like it had 12 years ago. He turned to the tech beside him. "Begin recovery sweep. Priority, H01 and H02. In the medical bay, red lights started blinking above the table. Dr. Miles placed the data core inside a compartment beside the terminal. "Once this activates," she warned, "they'll come for both of us." Jason Statham nodded again. "Good." He turned to the wall, placed a thin sheet of glass over a scanner no one had used in years. It blinked twice, then played a voice file, Langley's voice. "12 years ago. You're not soldiers. You're scaffolding. We're building people over you." Jason Statham stared at the glass until the words faded, then smashed it with the side of his hand. The boy sat on the edge of his bed now, eyes fixed on the vent. He could feel it coming, not noise, not light. But wait, the air around the prison was changing again. A storm no one else could sense, except him, and Jason Statham. Langley stood at the edge of the archive corridor as the security lights turned red. He didn't panic. He simply straightened his jacket and muttered, "Then let's begin the next collapse." The prison didn't feel like a prison anymore. The air changed first thicker, like breathing inside a tightening fist. Then came the lights, white to blue, blue to red, not a siren. A system shift. Jason Statham knew the color code. It was part of the Ghost protocol. Red sequence 7, full memory containment. He didn't look at Dr. Miles. She already knew they were about to be disappeared. Langley stood in the upper admin bay, gloves on, tablet in hand, flanked by two private security contractors who didn't wear uniforms, just matte black jackets with encrypted tags. Not prison staff. Not federal, Ghost recall agents. He tapped once, all lower access gates locked. All elevators halted, stairwells sealed. One point of extraction now remained, a tunnel under corridor K7, accessible only through a buried records hatch. Langley didn't want to purge Jason Statham. He wanted to isolate him, and if possible, reprogram him. Jason Statham moved through the oxygen-chilled corridor beside the surgical bay. He didn't run, he calculated. Each movement controlled, each breath timed. Behind him, Dr. Miles packed the last of the memory patches and sealed them inside a small pouch. She followed without a word. They passed a rusted terminal, the same interface Jason Statham had bypassed 12 years earlier. He pressed two keys. A camera flickered, not external, internal. It showed the boy still in his cell, sitting, waiting. But there was something in his hand now, a wire. Jason Statham narrowed his eyes. He wasn't repairing anything. He was building a trigger. Langley flipped a second switch on his tablet. A voice message cued and played through every intercom in the prison, but only in the Ghost wing. The voice wasn't his. It was Jason Statham's, from a recovered training log. "You will not feel the pain. You will remember the orders." Jason Statham stopped mid-step. That message wasn't a warning. It was a reactivation protocol. For every dormant sleeper they'd ever trained inside the compound. Inside cell 17C, two men twitched, not visibly. Internally, one blinked twice. Tapped a finger against the bed frame 4 times. Then stood, no emotion. He simply walked toward the sink, reached beneath it, and retrieved a small wrapped object, wrapped in soap, metal. Jason Statham turned to Dr. Miles. "How many?" She didn't speak, just held up 4 fingers. 4 still inside, 5 dormant, 1 unaccounted. Jason Statham exhaled slowly. "Langley's playing old music," she said. Jason Statham looked down the corridor. "Then we break the radio." Back in the surveillance bay, Langley watched as one by one the 4 cells opened. Only those 4. All inmates stepped out at once. No expression. Perfect sync. The original Ghost unit except Jason Statham. Langley smiled to himself. Let's see if he still leads when he's outnumbered. In the upper corridor, the boy moved quickly now. He had disassembled 2 power regulators and rewired them using stolen fuse links. He didn't ask if it would work. Jason Statham had taught him the first rule of the field: fail forward. Even mistakes had weight if dropped in the right direction. He twisted the last wire. A hum filled the air, and for 5 seconds, the main hallway lights reversed polarity, white turned black, and in that darkness, Jason Statham moved. He reached the first shadow target in silence. The man never saw him. A whisper behind his ear, a hand under his jaw, and the body folded like a dying star. No kill, just sleep. The second came faster. A sharp twist, a fall, a strip of electrical tape across the throat. Jason Statham wasn't fighting ghosts. He was remembering them. And reminding them who taught them how to vanish. Dr. Miles rerouted the eastern panel gate. She didn't have the code, but she had the algorithm Jason Statham left her years ago, encrypted inside the edge of a poem he'd scratched onto her surgical tray. It worked. The gate blinked green. They moved forward. Langley's smile began to fade. The feed wasn't matching the inputs. One Ghost unit was offline, then another. Langley stared at the grid, then leaned into the mic. "Override," he said. "Reassign subject 0. The screen blinked. A 5th cell opened. Jason Statham felt it before the alarm triggered. A presence. A rhythm. The one ghost that had gone unaccounted. H04, trained in silence. trained in endurance, trained in betrayal. He turned. A door behind him opened slowly. A figure stepped out, taller than Jason Statham. Scar under his left eye, knuckles like rebar, movements quiet but heavy with purpose. He didn't raise a weapon. He raised his hand, closed it into a fist, challenge accepted. Jason Statham dropped his stance. Tension coiled into his legs. The air crackled between them. And then, they collided, not with fury, with history. Fists met bone in silence. Jason Statham didn't strike first. He never did. But when H-04 lunged, a freight train in flesh, Jason turned his body with the impact, using the man's own weight against him. They collided against a rusted support beam, dust falling like dry snow. No words, no rage, just calculation. Jason slid beneath a wide swing, elbow snapping into H-04's ribs, but the man didn't flinch, didn't break. He just grinned, a broken-tooth smile, and brought his knee up with such force it bent the steel railing behind Jason Statham. This wasn't a fight, it was a reminder. Langley watched the footage from the sub-corridor feed. He recognized every movement, every hesitation. Jason Statham wasn't trying to win, he was trying to see, to measure, to confirm something. Langley leaned in closer. The contractors behind him didn't understand the nuance, but Langley did. Jason wasn't fighting H-04. He was fighting the version of himself Langley tried to manufacture. Dr. Miles had split off 2 levels up, reaching the eastern storage quadrant. It looked like a warehouse graveyard, full of discarded riot shields, busted meal crates, and dust-choked respirators. But she wasn't here for inventory. She reached the steel trapdoor at the back wall, flipped a small latch hidden beneath a crate of cracked helmets, and exposed a narrow shaft spiraling downward. She climbed, fast, because the old archive wing below, the one thought collapsed after a quake, hadn't been sealed by accident. That's where Jason had buried it, the second core. In the corridor, Jason Statham and H-04 locked arms mid-slam, both men straining like tectonic plates grinding. Jason dropped low, shifted his weight, and drove his shoulder upward into the man's gut, enough to stagger him back 2 steps. Then Jason paused, looked into the man's eyes. Nothing, no recognition, no regret, just mission. Jason nodded once, then stepped forward and did something that made H-04 blink. He offered his hand, palm open, a memory trigger. Back in the Ghost Unit days, open palm gestures were embedded as cognitive disruptors, and for a split second, H-04 hesitated. Jason didn't waste it. He grabbed the man's wrist, twisted, and slammed his shoulder into the floor with surgical force, not to disable, to stun the program. In the admin bay, Langley's eyes widened. He slammed his fist into the glass. Jason was doing it again, not breaking bodies, breaking conditioning. In the lower shaft, Dr. Miles reached a sealed chamber door, keypad burned out from age. She took out the device Jason had given her, the slim pulse chip wrapped in cloth, slid it across the scanner. It turned green. The door cracked open inside, black, then flickering lights. And in the center of the room, covered in a thermal blanket, a military-grade server core pulsed faintly, not just memory, witness data, every training tape, every mission, every order Langley had ever sent, untouched, unaltered. Meanwhile, the boy had rerouted the comm link in his cell. Not to call out, to call in. He wasn't trying to escape. He was trying to jam the reactivation command cycling through the older inmates. Jason had taught him to disrupt not with force but with confusion. So he looped a signal, Jason Statham's old field report from a desert op. No contact for 36 hours, terrain compromised, they're bleeding from the inside. The system read it as live, and the signal started bouncing between towers. The ghost agents paused, one blinked twice, then stepped back into his cell. Back in the corridor, H-04 coughed once, spat blood. Sat up slowly. Jason didn't strike again. He waited, watched, then slowly reached into the wall grate and pulled out a small black pouch, dropped it in front of the man. Inside, photos of the unit, together. Before it all broke, H-04 looked at them, said nothing. But this time, he didn't raise his fists. Langley knew. He grabbed the mic, opened the general channel, and spoke directly to Jason for the first time in 12 years. You think this is redemption? Silence. Then the camera feed blinked. Jason had found it. Langley's voice box wasn't on a secured line. Jason Statham could hear him. But he didn't respond. Down in the archive chamber, Dr. Miles tapped a screen and watched as video after video loaded. Ghost training logs, experiment files, unit assessments, all unredacted. She uploaded them to the black drive Jason had given her, then paused on one final video: Jason Statham in a cage, refusing to strike a crying trainee, Langley screaming from off-screen, "Hit him! Prove you're ready!" Jason shaking his head. That moment had been erased from every file. Except this one. She copied it twice. Up above, the lights flickered again, then locked to blue. Containment broken. Jason turned toward the upper hall. More guards were coming, not ghost agents, just confused men with batons and riot shields. Jason Statham didn't posture. He didn't warn. He just moved past H04, who now stood but didn't follow. He just saluted once, silently. The blue lights pulsed down the hallways like a slow countdown. Jason Statham moved through them without hesitation, past unconscious guards, fractured wall panels, old vents spitting steam. Behind him, the walls seemed to close in, not with panic but with intention. Langley wasn't trying to stop him anymore. He was trying to trap the story. Erase the witnesses, destroy the tapes, rewrite the myth. Jason Statham didn't run. He made sure every camera still worked, because this time someone needed to see. Dr. Miles moved through the archive wing, the black data drive secure in her chest rig. The final copy, with all 10 flagged videos, was compressed and locked. She passed by the bones of a burnt-out drone rack, then kicked through water pooled at the base of a sealed airlock. A generator buzzed nearby, and then the hallway dimmed, backup power rerouted. Someone else was tapping in. She didn't flinch, just whispered, "He's waking them." Langley stood in the mirror chamber, where ghost recruits had once been tested with visual feedback loops until their instincts replaced memory. He stared at a looped video on the wall. Jason Statham, 27, defusing a bomb while bleeding from the shoulder, choosing not to evacuate until the child was safe. Langley whispered to himself. They never saw that version. He turned and opened a secured locker. Inside, another set of ghost tags, newer, shinier, not earned, issued, stamped with sequence 0 to 9X, the replacement squad. In the courtyard level where the prisoners were still locked down, chaos was strangely absent. The boy had neutralized the loop. Ghost agents had returned to their bunks. Even guards, confused and off-script, were ignoring orders coming through their earpieces. Jason Statham had destabilized the chain, not by command, but by pattern disruption. Nothing frightened the system like silence where noise was expected. Jason moved through the eastern hall. H04 followed now, not as a shadow, but as a man remembering who he used to be. The corridor ahead opened to the ventilation shaft, once used for rapid evac drills, now left sealed by rust and time. Jason Statham kicked the lower panel. It didn't move. H04 stepped forward, grabbed the frame, lifted until the panel tore open with a scream of metal. The path forward lay in dust, the old escape route. At the same time, Langley's contractors reached the archive floor where Dr. Miles had gone silent. But she wasn't hiding. She was waiting. The first one through the hall never saw the blade. Not a weapon, just a piece of carbon steel sheared from a broken console. She moved fast, precise, not to kill, to delay. She cut the power behind her. The hallway blacked out. The only sound left, the hum of the core as it continued to export into the drive. Jason Statham climbed through the ventilation chute, every step echoing with hollow thuds. Midway through, the metal bent inward, scarred from a fire years earlier. He paused, looked to his side. A faint handprint scorched into the steel, a child's hand from that night, the riot, when the lab burned, when Langley let half the unit die just to see who would crawl out. Jason closed his eyes for a second, then kept moving. Langley activated sequence 0 to 9X. 9 screens lit up. Faces unfamiliar, no scars, no dust, too clean, too fast, no pain behind their eyes. Langley watched them load into armored carriers, said only one word: erase. Back underground, Dr. Miles finished the upload. The core went dark. She removed the drive, tucked it deep in her vest pocket, then turned to the far wall. A ladder, iron-welded, led to the old incinerator chute. It hadn't been used in 6 years. She climbed without hesitation. Jason reached the upper hatch, forced it open. Above him, cold air, moonlight, and silence. The old courtyard, buried behind the storage block, unused since the riot. He pulled himself through, then reached back for H04. The larger man hesitated, looked behind him, then up at Jason Statham, and climbed. Together, they stood in a space untouched by command for years. Then Jason looked up at the surveillance dome in the corner. A light blinked once. Someone was watching. Langley, in the control bay, watching both men. He didn't smile, didn't speak, just tapped his mic and said, "Alpha Squad, 20 seconds out." Jason didn't run. He moved to the utility shed beside the courtyard wall. Inside, dust-covered equipment, obsolete, but beneath the floor panel what he buried years ago remained: a tracker, a transmitter, and a tape. A literal magnetic tape, wound carefully inside a small steel case. He slotted it into the transmitter. No digital, no network, just raw analog signal, truth in its oldest form, the kind of signal the new squads couldn't block. Dr. Miles emerged from the chute into the courtyard. The moon cast long shadows. She didn't ask what Jason was doing. She just handed him the drive. He placed it beside the tape. Two worlds, digital and analog, now combined. Jason pulled the battery from his belt, snapped it into the transmitter. It hummed. A red light blinked. Then, transmitting. H04 turned to the sky. He could hear it. Choppers approaching, too fast, too clean, not extraction, erasure. Jason Statham stood, eyes fixed on the signal light. Dr. Miles beside him, H04 behind him, and the old courtyard bathed in stillness. Until a beam of light struck the center. The chopper had arrived, and the new agents began to descend. No warning, no announcement, just black ropes and silence. Jason didn't raise a weapon, didn't flinch, just whispered. They erased the wrong file. The sky above the courtyard was perfectly still. No wind, no clouds, just the drone of a single black helicopter hovering above the cracked concrete, and the slow descent of 9 bodies in black, one by one, like shadows falling in sync. Jason Statham didn't move. Neither did Dr. Miles. H04 stepped slightly to the side, not to run but to clear the space. The first man touched the ground, then another, all of them in identical armor, matte plates with no names, just a number stamped onto each chest. 0 to 1, 0 to 2, 0 to 3, all the way to 0 to 9. The last to descend was the shortest. Female, but her movements were sharper, faster. She landed and immediately scanned the ground, calculated terrain pressure. She wasn't looking for Jason. She was evaluating escape vectors. Jason watched her, not with surprise, with recognition. They didn't clone him physically. They cloned his response algorithms. This was his replacement, not biologically, operationally. Langley stood over the feed in the surveillance bay, silent, breathing through his nose. His contractors didn't speak. They weren't there to comment. Just watch the moment history turned digital. Langley leaned forward and tapped a command. 0 protocol, observe only. He didn't want to fight. He wanted the new squad to study Jason in real time, to evolve past him. In the courtyard, none of them raised a weapon. They formed a half circle. Jason didn't blink. He stepped forward. 1 foot, that was enough. 0 to 3 stepped back. Langley noticed it immediately. Mark 0 to 3 for cognitive recalibration, he muttered. Dr. Miles stepped closer, whispering, "They don't know what to do." Jason didn't answer, but she was right. The replacements were built for perfection. But perfection didn't anticipate hesitation. Jason took one more step, deliberate, slow. 0 to 1 jaw twitched. Back in the eastern chute, the boy was moving again, not running, climbing. He had seen the feed, the new agents, and something in his posture changed. He didn't panic. He didn't cry. He just whispered. He surrounded, and began rewiring the portable relay node Jason had built him 3 episodes ago. The one Jason said never to use unless the system began replacing people. He activated it. It didn't open doors. It opened loops. Old training footage began broadcasting through the prison's internal network. Raw, unedited data of Jason Statham disarming bombs, redirecting hostage takers, refusing unethical commands. Every ghost inmate saw it. So did the new recruits. Jason turned slightly, to the east wall. Behind it, the interior communications ladder. He moved, not fast, just steady. 0 to 4 twitched again, and then finally 0 to 7 stepped forward. First contact. Jason didn't raise a guard, just watched. 0 to 7 gait was perfect. Same shoulder tilt Jason had, same low center. But not the eyes, they were empty. Langley leaned into the mic. Begin engagement simulation. Non-lethal. Test 01. 0 to 7, hands flexed. He leapt forward. Jason sidestepped, grabbed the arm mid-flight, redirected the motion into a spin. 0 to 7 landed on his feet, sharp, but not improvising. Jason sighed internally, still predictable. Up above, Langley added a second command, pair 0 to 6, counter. Jason turned just in time as 0 to 6 came low. This time Jason moved backward, not to evade, to measure. 2 moves in, 3. He let 0 to 6 lock his arm just for 2 seconds. Then Jason twisted out with a foot pivot only someone with old scars knew how to time. 0 to 6 hit the wall, not hard, but enough to stagger. 0 to 1 and 0 to 2 adjusted position. They weren't reacting to him. They were learning from him. Jason's stomach turned. They weren't soldiers. They were feeds. Dr. Miles reached into her coat and activated the jammer. Suddenly, the replacement squad stuttered, only for a second, but it was enough. Their feed link went static. Langley's screen blinked. He slammed his fist down. She's severing their neural loop. He turned to the secondary operator. Bring in Omega-1. The tech paused, but she's now. In the ventilation room 2 floors down, a separate door unlocked. A chamber not linked to any map. Inside it, a chair, and in it, a girl no older than 20, eyes closed, hair buzzed short. Arms strapped gently but tightly, she opened her eyes and whispered. Jason, in the courtyard. Jason felt it, not a sound, a pull. The same way you feel gravity shift when a storm is coming. He turned east. Dr. Miles looked at him. She saw it too, something else had been activated. But this one wasn't a replacement, it was a project. Back in the prison's lower wings, inmates had begun to stir, not because of noise, because of the tapes. One by one they saw the real Jason Statham, not the myth, not the monster. Just the man who had chosen not to strike, not to run, not to betray. And some of them, the ones wired with failure switches, began to override their programming because they remembered. The replacements began to flicker, not visibly, internally, one by one their gestures slowed. Because the feed had corrupted, they weren't learning, they were watching emotion, and emotion was never clean. Jason walked directly up to 0 to 1, the closest one, the leader. They stood face to face. Jason reached up and tapped the man once in the center of his chest. Where the unit code was printed, 0 to 1 flinched. It wasn't pain, it was memory, but it didn't belong to him. Jason whispered, "You're a mirror, but I'm still the source." She stepped barefoot into the light, no guards, no hesitation. No memory of how she got into that chair, but every memory of who put her there. Her name was never logged. No badge, no birth date, not even a file in the official Ghost Unit register. They called her Echo, but only one voice had ever said her real name, Jason Statham. She remembered it not from words, but from how he moved, because Echo was the only other person who'd survived the original batch. But Jason had been sent to the field. She'd been kept in storage, in the courtyard. Jason Statham's hand still hovered after tapping the chest of 0 to 1. A ripple effect spread through the formation. Small twitches in posture, shoulders relaxing slightly, eyes blinking out of sync. They were watching him, but now they weren't mirroring, they were glitching. Langley's experiment was doing what it was never supposed to do, feel. Langley pivoted to the far terminal. He typed rapidly, bypassing the override. "I need control of subject Echo." The screen pulsed red. Cognitive lock engaged, manual authorization required. Langley cursed under his breath. The lock had been placed by someone else. Someone who hadn't trusted Langley completely, Jason. Echo passed through the southern maintenance corridor barefoot, past 2 unconscious guards. She didn't look at them. Her face showed no expression. But her fingertips dragged along the wall, as if she was reading history through the vibrations. She paused at a rusted junction, pressed a palm to the metal. The wall didn't open. It unfolded, a rotating mechanism revealing a sealed hallway with symbols burned into its edges. Language not written, code left by Jason. He'd been here before, and left a map she could feel, not read. Jason turned from the replacements, eyes narrowing. He felt the air shift again, not from the agents, not from Miles, from below. He turned to Dr. Miles, who already knew. "She's awake." Jason didn't ask how she knew, he simply moved, and the replacements, they didn't follow, they just watched him go. Like students watching a ghost walk out of a classroom for the last time. Langley paced, "Send in Omega. Now." The technician hesitated. "We haven't tested the," I said now. A second vault opened below the main level, and inside Omega stood waiting. It wasn't a person, It was a drone-piloted suit, built with Jason's frame specs, simulated reflexes, voice-coded AI interface. It didn't look like him, but it moved like him. Langley stared at it through the glass. Let's see if the machine does what the men couldn't. Echo reached the old debriefing wing. Dust layered every surface like snow. She opened the center console and removed a small disk from beneath the rusted control pad. It was labeled with a single word, remember. She placed it into the reader. A hologram flickered to life. Jason Statham, younger, blood on his sleeve, dirt on his face, sitting in this exact room. His voice played, "If you're seeing this, Echo, then I failed. Or I made it further than they expected. Either way, you've got the piece I didn't." He looked away in the recording. "They told us we were weapons, but we were mirrors, and mirrors crack." She closed her eyes. The disc ejected itself. Jason entered the old access tunnel by the sub-basement laundry hall. He moved like he'd rehearsed this in his sleep. Because he had, this wasn't escape anymore. It was retrieval. He reached the lower vault and saw the open chair, empty, and then he heard it, not footsteps, breathing. From the far side of the hall, Echo stepped into view. She was taller than before, leaner, scar on her neck, but her eyes were the same. Jason didn't smile, neither did she, but both of them remembered. Langley watched both figures on two separate monitors. He pressed a command. Omega activated. It didn't boot up with noise. It just moved and began running toward their location. Echo walked forward slowly. Jason stepped closer. Their hands didn't touch, but the space between them charged like static. Echo whispered more to herself. "You left a code." Jason nodded once. "That's what they couldn't predict," he said. "I knew you'd find it." Behind them, the hallway lights flickered. Something was coming. Dr. Miles rerouted the courtyard feed to loop static again, then pulled H04 aside. "Langley's sending something worse." H04 looked toward the old East Tower. His breath stilled. "Worse than us," she nodded. "Worse than memory." In the inner tunnel, Jason and Echo began to move, together, not as a team, as a single reaction, each one understanding the blind spots of the other. They moved through the wiring room, Jason disabling the proximity sensors while Echo rerouted power through her bare hands like she was tuning a piano. The system lights turned green. They weren't shutting things down. They were restarting them. Langley's screen displayed, Omega in range. And then, direct engagement in 0045 Omega entered the outer shaft, a mechanical shape in full blackout armor. No human skin, no breath, no delay. Just simulation running in real time, every Jason Statham movement digitized, every reflex programmed. But it didn't calculate deviation. Jason didn't fight to win, he fought to protect. Echo turned to him. "He's sending it," Jason nodded, then opened the last wall panel inside. A core detonator, not for destruction, for EMP flash. He looked to Echo. "This shuts down the feeds, the suits, the loop." She nodded. "But didn't take it." Jason placed it in her palm. "You're faster now. Lighter." She didn't argue, she just ran. Jason turned and waited. Omega didn't slow down. Its feet shredded the old floor, metal claws scoring gouges through the concrete as it closed the distance. 20 meters. 15. The old surveillance lights above its path exploded from static interference, not from impact. The suit was running on a signal field so dense, it melted weak wiring in its path, and Jason Statham didn't move. He just stood in the hall, staring down the corridor with a kind of silence that didn't belong in war. A silence not of surrender but of understanding. Behind him, somewhere deeper in the crawlspace levels, Echo was still running. EMP in hand. The timing had to be exact. If she hit the pulse too early, Omega's field would reboot before its threat system shut down. If she was late, Jason wouldn't be able to stall it a second time. Langley stared at the live telemetry feed. Omega's vitals were perfect. Core temperature holding, servos unflinching, targeting matrix live. But something inside him, something even he didn't want to name, twitched. It was too smooth, too efficient. Omega was operating without fear, hesitation, or memory, and that meant Jason had already won. Jason took one step forward, only one, and Omega reacted. It charged full body, no deceleration. Its upper frame spun mid-run, launching a hooked arm toward Jason's throat. Jason ducked, not fast, timed. The claw missed by millimeters. And Jason struck once, open palm, to the lower joint behind the knee. It didn't stop Omega, but it made the machine recalculate. Jason didn't move again. The corridor tightened. Omega reanalyzed, and this time launched a shoulder charge instead of claws. Jason sidestepped. Just enough to make Omega collide with the support beam. Cracks spread through the concrete, dust dropped from the ceiling. Jason looked up. That was his window, he whispered without sound. Now. Echo turned the final corner, her breath controlled. No panic. She reached the center chamber, the core ventilation access, the exact intersection of 4 corridors. At the center, a fuse board Jason had rewired years ago with a manual override in case digital controls ever failed. She slammed the EMP against it, pressed both activation nodes. The capacitor hissed once, then detonated, silent white pulse. Omega paused mid-swing, stopped, mid-movement. Its leg hung in the air half a meter from Jason's face. Then its eyes flickered, and the light inside died. Omega slumped forward, not like a man, like an idea collapsing. Jason stepped aside. The machine dropped to the ground like a ragged steel exoskeleton steaming at the edges. In the control room, Langley didn't blink, just turned away, pulled a small drive from the side console, and walked out, no words, because he knew what Jason had done. It wasn't about defeating Omega. It was about teaching the system why it failed. Echo returned to the corridor 2 minutes later. Jason was sitting against the wall, one hand resting on his knee. He didn't look injured, but he looked tired. She sat beside him, and they waited. No conversation, just the kind of quiet between people who had once been experiments and were now survivors. Dr. Miles was watching them from the old air tower. She'd rerouted the cameras to avoid Langley's eyes, but she didn't record this moment. Some memories weren't meant for tape. Some truths were earned, not captured. A soft click echoed from beneath Jason's boot. He reached down, lifted a metal plate. Inside, an old micro-recorder, analog, taped over 10 times, scratched and dirty. Jason looked at Echo. I left this here the night I escaped. He pressed play. Static, then his voice, younger, angrier. I don't know who you'll become. Maybe they'll change your name. Maybe they'll say you volunteered for this, but I know what I saw in your eyes. Short pause. You weren't a ghost. You were a signal. And if you hear this, it means you're still sending. Static again. Then silence. Echo stared at the floor, her voice barely audible. They said I failed recalibration. Jason looked at her sideways. No, he paused. You remembered. That night the prison's alarm system shut down. Not due to sabotage, because someone on the upper level, a technician whose brother had once trained with Jason, saw what was happening and turned the system off. One button, one silent decision. The facility went dark. Doors unlocked, not all, just the right ones. Elsewhere in the building, replacement agents from Sequence 0 to 9X began removing their armor, not in defiance, in confusion. They couldn't describe what they felt, because emotion wasn't in the programming, but curiosity was, and Jason had given them something no code could erase, a choice. Langley drove alone, out of the facility, out of the valley into the next command, because men like him didn't stop, they relocated. But as he passed through the checkpoint, a security officer leaned in. You left this, the man said, handing Langley a folded piece of paper. Langley opened it, one sentence hand-scrawled. You replaced the wrong man. Langley didn't speak, didn't fold the note. He let it drift out the window as he drove away. Back in the courtyard, Jason Statham walked once more, alone this time. Echo had gone to the West Wing to find others. Dr. Miles had vanished into the admin files. H04 had disappeared the second the alarm shut off, but Jason walked past the transmitter again. The signal had stopped. The light was off, but not everything needed to be recorded. Some missions ended not in explosions, but in a slow return to self. And yet, as he reached the eastern gate, something stopped him. A sound, not boots, not drones, a voice, faint, small, a child's voice. Jason turned slowly. The courtyard wasn't empty, someone was standing there. A boy, the one who had watched the tapes, rerouted the node and triggered the loop. He held something in his hand, a small tag, dog tags, but they weren't Jason's. They were his own. He held them out. Jason didn't take them. He knelt and said nothing, just waited. The boy whispered, they said I'd forget everything. Jason didn't blink. They were wrong. The east yard was no longer watched. No more guards on the towers. No spotlights sweeping over the razor wire. Just an open field behind the ruins of a security office, wind tugging at the scorched edges of Langley's last experiment. Jason Statham stood at the far end of the yard, eyes fixed on the barbed fence. Not on what was behind it, but on what wasn't, because the boy wasn't there. The same boy who had shown him the tags, whispered that the memories were real, was gone. No struggle, no blood, just absence. Doctor. Miles sat alone in the relay room, watching the auxiliary feeds. The jail was quiet, too quiet. She flicked through corridor cams, looking for the boy. Nothing. Looked for Langley. No trace. Then switched to feed Zeta, a backup camera in the lower archival tier, beneath even the classified floors. And there she saw it. A door open that shouldn't have existed. Not on any map. Not on any record. Just a smooth hallway, dim-lit and curved like it was bored into the earth decades before the rest of the facility. Something was awake down there. Something older than Jason. Jason moved toward the breach point near the Foundation trench. He didn't speak. Didn't ask where Echo had gone. He already knew. She'd followed the boy, not to rescue him, to confirm something. Because she'd recognized the sequence in his tag. Not military. Not ghost unit. Civilian-born. And there was only one reason the government would give a child dog tags. They were prepping him for transfer. In the lower tier, Echo moved faster than she had in years. The concrete around her was colder, black-streaked, walls lined with broken lamps and out-of-date control panels. This section had been sealed since before her own training began, which meant someone had broken it open, recently. She passed a corridor marked Kratar, ducked beneath an old security door that had jammed halfway shut, and reached a round steel hatch with no label. On the floor just beside it, a single chalk mark, not random, an arrow, drawn by a child's hand. The boy had come through here. Jason dropped into the sublevel without sound. His limp had returned, but this time it wasn't camouflage, it was memory. Every step brought echoes of the cold room, the tank, the long night before activation. He moved through the outer ring of Archive Sector 9, where folders were kept in metal cases thicker than safes. Most had been gutted, burned, deleted, but one row remained intact. A faded sign above it read, "Surviving Assets Non-Responsive." Jason ran his fingers along the labels, not names. W3, C17, FX, RA1. Then he froze. A single box taped shut, the only one not labeled with letters, just one word, reverb. Echo found the boy 2 minutes later. He was sitting inside a training bay, alone, but not scared, just waiting. She didn't speak as she approached. The boy looked up. "I heard your name," he whispered. Echo crouched beside him. He pointed to the far end of the room where a cracked mirror hung sideways. "That's where they said they saw him, not Jason. The other one." Echo stiffened. "The other what?" He paused. "The one who woke up first." Jason opened the reverb file. Inside, 3 photos. One black and white, one blood-stained, one blurred like it had been taken through water. Each had the same man, or close, but none of them were Jason. The first one had no eyes. The second had a scar identical to Jason's but mirrored on the opposite cheek. The third, it wasn't a man at all. It was a child with Jason's bone structure. Date stamped 5 years before Jason's own recruitment. The hallway behind Echo lit up suddenly. A red light. Silent, not alarm, authorization. Echo turned. And for the first time since waking, she recoiled. Because what stepped into view wasn't a replacement. It was a person. Older than Jason, shoulders slouched, face aged but familiar. He looked at her the way animals do when they've lived through things no one believes. He whispered, "I was awake before the first batch." Echo's throat dried. "They said the prototypes died." He didn't answer. Just nodded once at the boy. "He's my son." Jason shut the file, closed it gently, then turned as the room behind him began to shift, not the walls, the air. Like pressure was building. He stepped back into the hallway, only to find a trail of lights coming on one by one. Leading toward the eastern perimeter, someone had activated the witness tunnel, an old glass-lined corridor used decades ago to let military generals observe training cycles from above, without entering the main chambers. But the glass wasn't one way anymore. Jason could see through. And what he saw made him stop cold. Inside the chamber below the glass, Langley, but not standing, not directing. He was sitting in a chair, alone. In front of him, a row of children, not many, just 4, all wearing old gray training uniforms. And all with eyes that flickered like they were watching something that wasn't there. Jason leaned forward against the glass, and then he saw it. A 5th child, behind them, face in shadow, but body posture unmistakable. He was watching the others like a teacher watches a class. And his hand, it was tapping something on the desk, not a weapon, not a console, a recorder. One Jason had seen before. Jason didn't breathe, because the man in the shadow was someone he recognized, not from photos, not from dreams, from the mirror. Jason Statham didn't move from the glass. The reflection staring back at him, distorted slightly by the curve of the panel, was not just his own. It was doubled, mirrored, mimicked. The boy behind the children tapped that recorder with the exact same cadence Jason had used in Omega training. Same finger, same rhythm, same pause after every fourth strike. Jason's jaw locked, not because it was haunting, because it was impossible. That tick wasn't taught, it wasn't from muscle memory. It was something Jason picked up in captivity. Alone, starving, counting hours in the tank when no one spoke to him for days. And yet this child had it, exactly. Below, in the chamber, Langley stood slowly from his chair. He didn't address the children. He didn't touch them. He simply turned to the shadowed boy and gave a short nod. The boy stopped tapping, then stepped forward into full light. Jason's breath caught. It wasn't resemblance, it was replication. Hairline, bone structure, height, even the slight bend in the collarbone. It was like someone had reverse-engineered his body and started over, but younger, fresher, and colder. No emotion in the eyes, just focus. Like the boy was running something inside him that hadn't finished loading. Echo stood near the boy from before, the real one, watching the older prototype speak. The man wasn't erratic or hostile. He moved like Jason did, controlled, deliberate, alert to every surface. He'd aged far beyond usefulness in the system's eyes, but he still carried the silence of someone built for violence. "You remember Langley?" he asked Echo. She nodded. "He didn't create us, he activated us." Echo frowned. "Then who?" "Doesn't matter," the man cut in. "They don't run things anymore." He pointed toward the upper ring of the chamber. "They do." Back behind the glass, Jason watched as Langley touched something on the side wall. A panel opened. A staircase descended. Jason didn't wait. He stepped back from the window and made for the hatch. He wasn't going to watch anymore. He was going in the chamber. The shadowed boy, the one who mirrored Jason, finally spoke. His voice was soft, not threatening, but rehearsed. "I know why you're here," he said, eyes locked on the other children. They didn't respond. They were watching the walls, the corners, the vents, like something else was expected to enter. Langley didn't interrupt, because this wasn't a test, it was a lesson. Jason reached the lower door just as the older prototype stepped out from the hallway Echo had left. Their eyes locked. Neither one lowered their gaze. Jason said nothing, but the man spoke. "They brought him back," the prototype said. Jason answered with silence, but his posture tensed. The man pointed toward the training bay. "He's not a clone." Jason didn't flinch. "I know. He's a trial Echo," the man added. "Built from leftover blood. Your batch was never terminated properly." Jason kept moving. He didn't need the history. He needed to see the boy up close. Inside the chamber, the boy moved toward one of the other children, a girl, maybe 9, her arms bruised from prior sessions. He crouched, reached into his jacket and pulled out a small strip of cloth. He tied it around her wrist, then looked at the other 3. "You're not here to fight," he told them. "You're here to see." The girl's lip trembled. "But I can't remember what it felt like before." The boy didn't react. "That's why I'm here." Jason entered the chamber from the rear corridor. The air was colder here. No vents, no heat. Langley didn't turn. He didn't need to, he just said, "It's not what you think." Jason walked past him toward the boy. The children stepped back as Jason approached, except for the boy who mirrored him. That one stayed still. When Jason stopped, 3 feet between them, the silence wasn't awkward. It was recognition. But not from memory, from Echo. Echo watched through the side port. She didn't intervene. She knew what this was. Not a standoff, a reunion. But not a family of design. Jason looked down at the boy. "What did they give you?" The boy didn't blink. "Everything you refused." Jason's hand twitched, not in anger and understanding. "And what did they take?" he asked. The boy hesitated. Then finally his voice dropped. "Choice." Langley turned and walked out, not defeated, not gloating, just done. Because this wasn't his plan anymore, it never had been. It was the boys. Jason crouched to the boys' level. "You don't have to be them. I'm not." "You're me," Jason said. The boy shook his head. "No." He stood slowly. "I'm what comes after." That night the lights in the old facility flickered out floor by floor. Not from EMP, not from sabotage, but from disconnection. Power rerouted. Systems wiped. The building was being turned off, one sector at a time. The boy hadn't just been trained, he'd been coded, and now, he was reclaiming. Echo stayed with the children. Jason walked with the boy through the old access ramp beneath the eastern towers. Neither spoke, but at the end of the corridor, a small door sat open. Inside, a platform with a long-forgotten server stack and one blinking light, the boy pointed. That's the first node. Jason stared at it. You're shutting them down, the boy nodded. Just the ones who forgot why we were made, Jason turned. And the ones who didn't forget. The boy looked up at him. They'll follow you. The server blinked once, then again, then died. Jason Statham stood still, hand not even on the terminal. He hadn't touched it. He hadn't needed to. The boy did it remotely, not through some interface or device. Just by knowing where the signal was buried. The shutdown wasn't a kill switch. It was a reclamation. The power grid wasn't collapsing. It was pivoting. Systems across the lower facility began rerouting. Doors once locked since the project's first iteration hissed open. Archive lights blinked awake. Corridors that had been sealed by order of Langley's predecessor now pulsed with fresh air and humming pressure. Jason stepped back. The boy didn't look at him. He was listening to something deeper than sound. In the mess hall, one floor up, a guard sat alone with a rifle. He hadn't moved since Langley left. He hadn't joined the others. He just waited, but when the lights flickered, not in a burst but a wave, he stood, because his wristband went dead. And that only happened when mainframe trust was revoked, which meant he was no longer considered part of the program. He left his weapon on the table and walked out. Back at the archive corridor, Echo crouched by a busted ventilation node. The kids had been hidden in one of the old nutrient wings, sealed from inside, no oxygen cycling for weeks. She was trying to restore climate flow before anyone else woke up, because the children in that hallway weren't the only ones. There were others, smaller, younger, unexposed. Jason had seen them on the list, Batch Delta 7, rejected for instability but never terminated. They'd been asleep this entire time. Echo turned the dial slowly, listening for the click of reconnection, and as the air returned, a soft thud came from behind her, tiny footsteps. Someone was already awake. The boy led Jason through a back hallway that didn't exist on any diagram. Every corner curved in subtle disobedience to the building's architecture, as if the original schematics had been overwritten in secret by someone who knew the prison wouldn't last forever. The hallway ended in a hexagonal room in the center, a chair, but not a torture rig, not a restraint unit, just a normal steel chair sitting before a table. On the table, a stack of analog tapes, and beside them, a cassette player. The boy sat, press play. Jason didn't sit. He stood behind the boy and listened. The voice on the tape wasn't Langley's. It was deeper, British, clipped, older. This is a reminder to future handlers. Sequence Echo 6 is not to be left unattended with other subjects beyond 7 minutes. Deviation rates rise. Emotional mimicry spikes. Termination may be required. Jason flinched, because he remembered that room. He'd sat in it, but he wasn't Echo 6. He was W4, and that meant the boy wasn't just a reflection. He was a predecessor. In the training yard, a new signal pulsed, not on screens, but in memory. One by one, children began walking from their rooms. No one summoned them. They just woke up, guided by something stronger than command. A shared instinct. They didn't speak to each other. They moved in silence toward the central chamber. Echo saw them first, a line of kids, maybe 15 total. Some no older than 6, others close to 14. No adults, no supervisors. She tried to intercept, but none of them paused. They walked around her, not dismissive, not afraid. They just knew where they were going. And Echo, for the first time, didn't. Jason watched the boy pause the tape. "Why this room?" he asked. The boy finally turned his head. "Because this is where they taught me to erase myself." Jason didn't answer, because that room had been built for exactly that. A chamber for wiping personality through sensory compression, but it never worked on him. He'd always kept something hidden, a trigger, a flicker, a memory. He asked the boy one more question. "You want to be free?" The boy looked up. "I don't know what that means." The lights cut again, this time not just in sequence, across the entire compound. Mainline disabled, backup power redirected. The screens on the top floor went static. Old files were purging in real time. Dr. Miles stood in the control tower, watching the system melt. She didn't try to stop it. She just saved one file, the only one she'd ever marked personal. It was Jason's first day inside the facility, not as a recruit, as a volunteer. She'd never told him, because he'd been drugged before the signing. And the signature on the consent form wasn't his. Downstairs, Jason stepped back from the boy. "We should go." The boy didn't follow. "This place is mine now." Jason's eyes narrowed. "This place made you." The boy stood and said the words Jason had once muttered in a locked cell 17 years ago. "I'm more than what they built." Jason's jaw tightened, because he hadn't said it to anyone. He'd said it to himself, but the boy had heard it anyway. Outside the walls, the hills buzzed, not with electricity. With sound, dozens of voices, footsteps, not soldiers, civilians, people who'd been looking for answers, people whose families had been marked missing for years. Langley didn't destroy the records, he just moved them, and now someone had leaked the coordinates. Jason and Echo emerged from the structure as dawn began to break, children behind them, some confused, some not, some reaching for hands that were no longer there. Jason walked ahead into the open toward the hilltop. He could see the line of figures forming, but the boy wasn't with them. He'd stayed in the underground, not by order, by choice. And for the first time since the first experiment, the facility made a decision without any commands. It locked itself, doors sealed, lights off, signal dead. The mountain swallowed its secret again. But the world around it had changed. The footage surfaced 36 hours later. Not in a news broadcast. Not on any government network. On a single private forum. Password protected, encrypted, hidden behind a shell that only a former Omega handler could crack. It showed the hill. Dozens of kids, Echo, Jason Statham walking at the front, civilians in the distance. But the angle, it wasn't drone footage. It was shoulder level. From within the crowd. Someone had been there. Someone had filmed it. And beneath the video, one caption blinked in green text. W4 confirmed alive. Protocol chain resumes. Ready phase 2. Jason didn't see the post. He was 300 miles away by then, riding inside an armored meat delivery truck modified for blackout travel. No comms, no ID plates, just rust and silence. He sat in the rear beside Echo and 5 of the youngest kids. None spoke. The hum of the tires was the only sound. The boy wasn't with them. He'd stayed behind in the sealed compound. Echo leaned forward, tapping a pad of folded notes. "We'll be safe at drop point B after that." Jason raised a hand. "No plans." Not yet. They hadn't even counted who was missing. Inside a long-forgotten archive chamber in Kansas, a retired analyst, Paige Renner, sat back in her chair, staring at a dusty screen. She hadn't touched the Omega console in 15 years, not since the program was dissolved. But when she entered her old credentials, a code burned into her memory. It worked. The system came online. Barebones, skeleton files only. Yet one phrase flashed instantly on login. MIA operator W4 surfaced. She sat up straighter. W4 Jason. Her eyes narrowed. That wasn't supposed to be possible. Jason exited the truck at a loading bay behind a meat processing warehouse in Nebraska. The building hadn't run product in over a decade. Now it served as a waypoint, temporary refuge for people who weren't supposed to exist. The door opened, and an old man with gray dreadlocks stepped out. His arm bore a faded Omega tattoo half burned off by a chemical scar. He nodded once at Jason. "Room 6B clean, quiet." Jason led the kids inside. No questions, no introductions. But the moment the door closed, he dropped to one knee. Not from exhaustion. From pressure. Something in the air had shifted. The youngest kid, Lyle, barely 6, dropped his stuff bare on the floor. Jason reached for it instinctively, but when his hand touched the cloth, he froze. A micronode was hidden in the stuffing. Something warm. Pulsing. Jason tore it open. Inside, a small glass vial and a metal strip. Echo stepped closer. "What is that?" Jason turned the vial over. Inside, a sliver of fiber and a grain of sand-sized tech. "I've seen this before." She frowned. "Where?" Jason's voice was low. "In a war that never happened." In the archive in Kansas, Paige Renner called an old contact, General Taddy's, now retired but never unplugged. His voice came through immediately. You're calling about W4. She blinked. You saw it. Everyone saw it. Everyone. Teddy sighed. They wanted this. Someone's pulling the curtain back. That footage didn't leak, it was released. Paige exhaled. Then he's not just alive. Taddy's cut her off. He's active and he has them. Paige's blood went cold. The kids. The code, the missing sequence. Jason sat in the corner of the warehouse room while Echo scanned the strip embedded in the vial. A slow pulse blinked on her tablet, 5 lights, evenly spaced. Each one represented a location. Jason didn't blink, because he knew where one of them led. Langley's old off-grid residence. A cabin in the woods, not a facility, just a decoy. But it had a basement, and the basement had a door with no lock. Only a retinal scan. And only one person had ever opened it. Jason. Outside the warehouse, a boy watched through a cracked fence, not one of theirs. Older, feral, not even part of Omega. He wore street rags, blood on his sleeves, and a broken camera in his hand. He wasn't watching Jason. He was waiting. And when the power grid flickered again, he turned and ran. The message had been sent. Phase 2 was not permission. It was a warning. In the woods north of Langley's old safe house, the boy who resembled Jason stood on a mossy slope, eyes closed. He wasn't alone. A girl stood behind him. Not one of the children from the facility. Older, 15 maybe, wild curls and one glass eye. She placed something in his hand. It was another vial, but this one had a red thread inside. The boy nodded once. They turned together and walked deeper into the woods, toward a tower no one had mapped, where the servers had never gone offline, where the real project had gone dark. Langley's cabin wasn't on any modern satellite grid. It sat tucked in a moss-choked grove 4 miles off the old State Route 8B, north of Desolation Pass. The road didn't just curve away, it ended. Nature took over. Trees so old they split pavement. Fog that sank to knee height and never lifted past morning. Jason Statham had only been here once. And that was enough. He stood at the edge of the clearing now, Echo beside him, a small group of children behind them. No sound, no birdsong, just that forest silence, the kind that made you feel watched before you even crossed the line. Jason didn't move. He let the silence stretch, let the weight of it settle. Then he stepped forward. Inside the cabin, dust didn't float, it hovered. Every object was right where it had been decades ago. A coat still hung by the fire. A rusted kettle sat on the stove, half full. The floor creaked under Echo's boots. The children said nothing. Jason just moved to the bookshelf. He pressed his fingers along the spine of the 3rd red volume, pulled. The floor clicked, then shifted. The center panel split open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into total black. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away in Atlanta, Paige Renner was tracing signal traffic. Someone had tried to mirror the Omega server before it went dark. She could see the transfer logs burst packets, burst again, then rerouted through a dead shell in Portugal. Whoever it was, they had access and intent. And it was Jason. She knew his footprint. This one didn't match. This one was jagged, hungry. She zoomed in on the metadata. Someone had tried to reactivate Delta Command. And the trigger, a retinal print from Jason, paired with a child. Down in the basement, Jason stepped into a room that didn't look like it belonged in a cabin. It was all stainless steel and embedded light strips, cold surfaces. A wall of empty observation pods lined one side. At the end of the room stood a chair and a monitor. The same setup from his original intake. Except this time, there was no handler. Only a flickering blue screen and a blinking prompt. Welcome back, W4. One of the children, Sima, a quiet girl with sharp eyes, wandered to the pods. She didn't speak, just placed her palm on one of the sealed glass doors. It opened, but what spilled out wasn't data. It was a folded photo. Jason took it. It was old, water-warped but clear enough. 5 kids, 1 adult. The adult was Langley. The kids were tagged E1, E2, E3, E5. There was no E4. Jason frowned, because he'd never heard of an E5. Outside, Echo noticed movement in the trees. She stepped out of the cabin, weapon lowered but ready. It was the boy. Not the same one they'd rescued. This one was taller, older, his face almost identical to Jason's but harder. He walked slowly, hands empty, and stopped exactly 10 feet from her. Echo said nothing. The boy tilted his head. "You brought them back." She nodded once. The boy didn't smile. "Then I'm not too late." Inside, Jason loaded the photo into the monitor scanner. The screen flickered. A map blinked into view, 5 points. Same locations Echo's tablet had revealed earlier, but this time there was a 6th. Hidden, buried beneath a wiped project, Omega Fire. Jason leaned in. The marker sat deep in the Ural Mountains, remote, frozen, forgotten. He zoomed in. Coordinates weren't accessible. Only one message appeared. Sequence only activates with complete protocol. Find E5. Jason froze. Because if E5 was alive, he was the only one who could open the final archive. And Omega Fire wasn't a kill zone. It was a rebuild chamber. Echo entered the cabin, guiding the new boy toward Jason. Jason turned. Locked eyes with him. Silence. "Then where's your batch?" The boy's voice was like gravel over memory. "Disbanded, erased, I stayed behind." "Why?" "To stop what's coming next." Jason narrowed his gaze. "You mean Omega Fire?" The boy didn't blink. "No, I mean the one that survived it." Far across the Atlantic, a military outpost picked up an anomaly. A low-frequency beacon, ancient coding, Omega-class encryption, layered with natural interference. It had been sent from beneath a glacier in the Urals. Not recently, not in the last year. It had been broadcasting for 11 years. Only now had it reached a receiver capable of understanding it. The signal decoded one phrase. Containment breach unresolved, operator rogue. The command chain reactivated. And they didn't ask who the rogue operator was. They asked who was supposed to have been dead. Jason sat by the monitor, all other kids now asleep upstairs. Echo stood by the stairwell, the new boy at her side. Jason looked at the photo again. 5 faces, a future that never happened, a project that was never meant to live beyond training. He finally spoke. "E5, who is it?" The boy didn't hesitate. "You are." Jason didn't respond. Just stared at the screen. Until Echo whispered from behind him. "If that's true, who the hell is W4? Jason Statham didn't answer right away. The basement light hummed, casting a bluish tint over the old Omega terminal. Behind him, Echo didn't move. The boy stood calmly, arms at his side like what he had said was just a fact, not a bomb. Jason kept his eyes on the photograph. 5 children. One tagged E5. A face blurred not from time but deliberate masking. The system had wiped that identity, but it didn't wipe the body. He set the photo down and stood. "I was W4. The boy shook his head slowly. "No, you were told you were W4. Above ground, the children slept, huddled in sleeping bags across the cabin floor. The youngest ones were still mumbling in their sleep, nightmares still leaking from what they'd escaped. But the girl, Sima, was awake, watching the staircase. Her eyes hadn't left it since Jason went down. She could feel it. Something had changed. Jason turned to the terminal and keyed in an override sequence, one that only Langley and the earliest Omega officers would know. The screen didn't resist. It opened an archival memory log labeled Deepwater Seed, Batch Alteration Redistribution Mem. Inside, files, images, scans. Jason clicked the audio log first. A raspy voice filled the room, Langley's, recorded before the collapse. "If this is being played, you've remembered too much, or not enough. W4 was the shell, E5 was the prototype, the only one we couldn't control, so we buried the real one in plain sight." Echo sat down slowly, her voice barely a whisper. "They gave you someone else's life." Jason didn't nod, didn't speak. He just stood there. And for the first time in a long time, his breathing changed. The boy moved toward the side wall and opened a locked cabinet. Inside were 2 objects. A sleek black case and an old mirror. He opened the case first, a single injector Omega-class serum, prototype batch, used for identity suppression and memory rewriting, long band. Jason stared at it. The boy held out the second object, the mirror. Jason looked in and saw a scar barely visible under his left eye. One he didn't remember getting. One that matched the tag from the child labeled E5. In a black site compound outside Berlin, a woman named Dr. Clemens watched footage streamed in real time from a worm in the Omega database. The same terminal Jason was using was live broadcasting everything. She leaned forward. Tag mismatch confirmed. Statham's cover ID has fractured. An operator behind her raised a trembling hand. Should we alert Tier 1? Clemens smiled faintly. No, he's walking himself toward the truth. Let him. She pointed to the screen. The moment he finds that last vault, we strike. Jason finally spoke again. If I was E5, what happened to W4? The boy answered flatly. W4 died in simulation. His body was used to shield your exit. They copied his tag, gave it to you. They had to. You were the only one they couldn't control. Jason stared down at the injector. He didn't pick it up. Then why send me back in? The boy's voice was softer now. They didn't. You went back in yourself. You wanted to forget. Echo looked up sharply. You wiped yourself. Jason didn't answer. The boy did. He thought it would kill the code embedded in his neural base, but it didn't. It buried it. Langley didn't just train us. He programmed us. Jason finally turned. Then why am I waking up now? The boy's eyes met his. Because someone triggered your sequence. Someone you saved. Above ground, Sima stood. Quiet, moved to the door, opened it. And there, just at the edge of the tree line, stood the older girl. The one with the glass eye. She didn't say a word, just held up a vial with a red thread inside. Then she vanished. Jason stood in front of the Omega terminal as the last sequence unlocked. A final message appeared. To rebuild fire, you must walk through ash. Omega 5 coordinates unsealed. Below it, a pulse mark, a location tag, a countdown. 72 hours. Echo inhaled sharply. They know. Jason turned off the screen. They always did. Back in Berlin, Dr. Clemens closed her terminal and walked into a dark conference room. 10 chairs, 9 filled. A projection blinked on behind her. A satellite image of Jason Statham walking out of the cabin with children behind him. She spoke calmly. The original fire was lost. The sequence is now alive. One man leaned forward. What about the Echo unit? She's active. Can she be turned? Dr. Clemens smiled coldly. She doesn't need to be. She was never meant to last beyond the final signal. Jason exited the basement and closed the trapdoor. The children looked up as he stepped back into the cabin. He didn't speak, didn't give orders. He just looked at them. Each face. Each child. Then at the night outside. We leave at first light. Echo didn't argue. Because even though they didn't understand the full scope yet, they could feel it. Jason was no longer just leading them. He was remembering why. Far in the Ural Mountains, beneath the frozen soil, a sensor ignited. It had been dormant for 16 years. Now it blinked once. Then again. A chamber, long sealed, began to hum with quiet power. Within it, a chair. And a second injector. This one had a different tag burned into the side. E5 backup core. The sun had barely touched the frost when Jason Statham stepped outside the cabin. The forest didn't feel the same anymore. Not after the Omega terminal came alive. The silence wasn't silence now. It felt like something was watching, calculating, waiting. The trees whispered more than wind. He stood still for a moment, adjusting the strap of the duffel bag over his shoulder. Inside was the injector he hadn't used, the photo, and a sealed drive Echo recovered from the cabin's wall lining. The children were inside, still asleep. Echo stood near the tree line, binoculars sweeping east. She didn't look at him, but her posture said enough. They were being tracked. 60 kilometers south, a blacked-out vehicle drifted through the dirt trail that ran parallel to the old access road. Inside, a biometric screen displayed Jason's face, older, colder, tagged as EXPIRED. The driver, suited in unmarked tactical gear, tapped once on his comms. Visual match confirmed. Trigger window is live. From the back seat, a female voice responded. Then start the protocol. We take him before he finds the vault. Jason and Echo moved fast. The forest route wasn't mapped, but Jason remembered the older recon maps burned into his memory from Langley's original files. 3 ridges, a dried riverbed, and then a small settlement that used to act as a drop point for supplies. They didn't speak much, just moved, quiet, measured. By the time they hit the first ridge, Jason could see fresh tracks in the dirt. Too fresh. Not forest prints, tactical boots, heavy, deliberate. They weren't being followed. They were being channeled. Inside the cabin, Sima found the note Jason had left. 3 words. Stay with Langley. It made no sense. Langley was dead, but she didn't panic. She walked to the trapdoor, opened it again, and went down. The basement lights were still on. But the screen was blank now. Instead, a recording played, motion triggered from Jason's departure. Langley's face. Not in a message. In a looped confession. And Sima was the only one watching it. Jason and Echo stopped just before the second ridge. Jason crouched low, brushing his fingers along a rusted coil half buried in the soil. Wire. Electrified. Freshly powered. Trip fencing, he muttered. Echo's jaw tensed. They're boxing us in. Jason didn't nod. He just looked upward. The sky above them was too quiet. No birds, no insects. Then he saw it, a faint shimmer barely there. A drone. Not consumer grade, military stealth shell. They weren't tracking him with heat. They were tracking his memory signature. Jason whispered under his breath. They activated MK beacon protocol. Far off, inside a mobile command base cloaked as a medical trailer, Dr. Clemens stared at the waveform data. Jason's memory pulses weren't just spikes, they were leaking. Project Omega hadn't just implanted identities, it broadcasted them in failure states. And Jason's had begun to fail. She smiled. Begin the pressure run. No contact, just push him into panic territory. The operator next to her raised a brow. You want to spook him? No, I want to see if E5 comes out. Jason stopped suddenly halfway down the second slope. He reached down, pulled up a rock, and under it, a thin black strip no wider than a pencil. Echo knelt. What is that? He didn't answer, just slid it into his pack. But his hand was trembling slightly. Because it was one of his own drop caches. From 16 years ago. Which meant someone had reconstructed his memory map from the original files. And someone knew where he'd go before he got there. At the bottom of the ravine they found the first marker, a weathered post, metal, burned halfway through. Jason scratched at the rust with a blade. Underneath the layers he found the insignia. Ural 3 rebuild start. It wasn't a vault entrance. It was a signal point. This was the first activation node, a ping tower for the long-range Omega vault buried beneath the mountains. They were right on track. And right on schedule. Echo looked over at him. How long until they closed the window? Jason didn't answer. But the countdown was already visible in his vision. 62 hours. Back at the cabin the kids were packed. Sima had taken charge, but the younger ones were restless. A knock came at the door, 1 knock. Pause, 2 knocks, then nothing. Sima didn't flinch. She walked to the side panel, opened a long-hidden compartment, and took out a blade no bigger than her hand. Jason had left it for emergencies. She walked to the door. Opened it. No one was there. Just a small envelope. Inside, a photo of Jason standing in a lab, surrounded by children, but not the ones here. These were older, sharper. And one of them looked like her. Jason and Echo found cover in a collapsed rail tunnel just west of the second slope. It wasn't on any modern map, but Jason had laid its bones years ago. They rested in silence for a while. Then Jason spoke, staring at nothing. They'll use a disorient protocol next. Echo nodded. How bad? Jason answered without emotion. They'll hijack the familiar, force me to see dead handlers, buried memories, break the tether between now and then. Echo glanced over. You think it'll work? Jason looked up at the dark tunnel ceiling. I'm not sure which version of me they're trying to break. Back in the mobile command unit, Dr. Clemens clicked on a new feed. The drone view zoomed in on a strange static pulse near Jason's location. It was flickering, irregular. She leaned in. He's remembering things out of order. This isn't tactical, this is raw. The screen changed again. Jason was no longer in the tunnel. He was in a desert. No, a training field. Then water. Then screaming. Clemens watched, fascinated. It's begun. She stood. Prepare the hallucination trigger. Give him exactly what he's not ready to remember. Jason jerked slightly. The tunnel was gone. He stood knee-deep in water, cold, salt in the air, a girl screaming somewhere behind him. Then silence. Then Langley. Not alive, but speaking. You're the only one who ran back in. Jason tried to breathe. Tried to blink. But nothing moved. Echo's voice pulled him out. You all right? Jason flinched back. They were still in the tunnel. Her hand was on his shoulder. The injector was still in the bag. He wasn't cracking. But he was close. The hallucination hadn't faded, it had retreated, waiting like a shadow behind Jason Statham's eyes. Even now, as he moved through the woods with Echo beside him, it clung to the edge of his perception. The rail tunnel was behind them. The second ridge passed, and ahead, through fog and dense bark, stood the abandoned comms tower. It wasn't operational anymore. At least it shouldn't have been. Jason slowed as they reached the chain-link fence that hung limp on its posts. Rusted, cut. Someone had been here recently, and not just once. He crouched beside a snapped link. Boot drag small, 2 of them. Someone's been running recon sweeps through here. He said it more to himself than to Echo. She scanned the treetops. How long before they hit us direct? Jason's response was a look, the kind he'd only given once before. Not yet, but soon. In the Blacksite Command trailer 80 kilometers north, Dr. Clemens watched the biometric overlay on Jason's neural map begin to shimmer again. The hallucinations were not random. The deeper he moved toward the original signal pylon, the more his fractured memories began to sink. Layer in Phase 2, interpersonal loss, she instructed. The technician hesitated. That will unlock emotional regression pathways. He could collapse. Dr. Clemens didn't blink. He could also wake up fully. Jason stepped through the creaking door of the tower's main floor. Everything smelled of dust, decay, and old copper, like memories of a war you tried to forget but never fully buried. And then it hit him, not through his eyes but his chest. He wasn't standing in the tower anymore. He was on the shoreline again. Only now there was blood on his hands. His clothes were soaked. A body at his feet, not enemy, not stranger, a friend. W4. The real one. Jason staggered back. Echo caught his arm before he could fall into the rusted frame behind him. He blinked hard, jaw clenched. I saw him, he muttered. They made me forget him. Echo pulled him back into focus. How do you know what's real? Jason looked up, eyes wet. I don't. Back at the cabin, the children had packed, but the air felt strange, like something was wrong. Sima hadn't spoken since finding the photo, the one with her lookalike in it. Echo hadn't told her everything. Neither had Jason. She folded the photo and slipped it into the back of her journal. Then she moved to the wall, the panel Jason had used, and began pressing in sequences. Not randomly. Precisely. She had seen them once before in a dream. Or maybe it wasn't a dream. The panel hissed, a drawer slid open. Inside, a notebook, Langley's handwriting. But not addressed to Jason. It was addressed to her. Echo set up a basic M scrambler at the top of the tower while Jason checked the power core. Most of the wires had been cut, but someone had rerouted a battery feed, and recently. Jason traced it to a lead pipe under the floorboards. A bundle of fiber lines led into a cracked wall cavity where a small glowing cylinder blinked red. It was a pulse drive, low range, but it wasn't broadcasting a signal. It was receiving one. Jason whispered, "They're not hunting me. They're waiting for me to activate something." Back in the command trailer, Dr. Clemens's breath caught. The cylinder's signal, too weak to track directly, had just pinged a secondary relay drone. They knew where he was. Now it was only a matter of closing the loop. "Send the ghost squad," she said quietly. "Tell them not to engage, just confirm his direction." The operator glanced back. "And if he finds the real vault?" Clemens smiled faintly. "Then we won't need to kill him. He'll kill himself trying to open it." Jason was back in motion. He and Echo left the tower before its signal could triangulate them. He didn't trust the ground anymore. It was too obvious. Instead, he rerouted them through the river, shallow, biting cold but clean of any trackable material. Halfway across, Echo stopped. A boy stood on the far bank, younger than the others, maybe 8, wearing no shoes. Jason's eyes narrowed. It wasn't a real boy. It was one of the mental implants, memory fragments. But something about the way the boy moved. Jason stepped forward. "Don't engage," he muttered. Echo nodded, stepping behind a low rock. She drew her small arc blade. The boy didn't run. He spoke without moving his lips. "You failed the first gate. You can't open the second." Then he flickered and vanished. Echo whispered, "That wasn't just hallucination. That was embedded command code." Jason knew. It meant someone had rebuilt Omega's last firewall. And it was now protecting his buried identity. In the trailer, Dr. Clemens stared at the data stream. Jason's EEG spiked. The hallucination response had bled into control-level cognition. She didn't know who had embedded that firewall boy, but it wasn't from her team. "Who did that?" she snapped. The technician shook his head. "It's not ours, that's old code, legacy tier, Omega Zero stuff." Clemens turned pale. Omega Zero had been dissolved before Jason was even created. And yet the boy had Jason's voice modulation embedded. That meant Jason Statham might have written his own fail-safe before wiping his memory. The children at the cabin had started to argue. Some wanted to leave, others were afraid. Sima didn't raise her voice, she raised her hand. And for a moment everything stopped. She opened Langley's notebook. Inside were drawings, maps, a name circled in red. Echo B asset locked inside protocol temple. She flipped more pages, schematics, faces. And one photograph clipped to the last page. It was Jason, younger, smiling, with his hand on her shoulder. It was her. Jason reached the far riverbank and stopped. His boots were soaked, the frost biting harder now. Echo followed in silence. They didn't speak. But Jason kept looking up, at the sky, the leaves, the strange motion in the light above the horizon. They weren't alone. Not just physically. Psychologically. He could feel eyes in the back of his memory, not recent, not from this decade. "Echo," he said calmly, "they're about to send a voice through my head." "What kind of voice?" He swallowed hard. "Mind." 10 kilometers out, the ghost squad moved into position. Black suits, heatless weapons, visual dampeners, non-lethal and less ordered. The leader tapped his earpiece. "We have visual on the subject, moving west by riverbank." Dr. Clemens's voice replied coldly, "Hold, let him hear the trigger first." Jason's hand shook slightly. Then the whisper came. His own voice in his head, layered with static. "The vault isn't real. Echo is the vault. You're here to bury it, not open it." He stopped walking. Echo turned to him, hand resting on her holster. "What did you hear?" Jason's face darkened. "We've been following the wrong map." Jason Statham stood still on the muddy riverbank, Echo watching him cautiously from a few steps away. The wind had picked up, yet the forest beyond them remained deathly silent, like the air itself didn't dare breathe. The words still rang in his head. Echo is the vault. He didn't believe them, not fully. But something shifted in him. He turned slowly, locking eyes with Echo. For a second, everything went still. Her hand was just barely resting near her hip, not on her weapon, but close. She knew something had changed in him. Jason didn't speak. He just moved forward. Miles away, Dr. Clemens watched the live neural waveform flatten for 3 full seconds. No activity, then a spike. "Emotion suppression just kicked in," the technician reported. "He's going cold." "Let it play," she whispered. "Let him start asking the questions we planted." Jason and Echo pressed on in silence. The river bent sharply, leading them into a gully overgrown with moss and lichen. Small stones crunched under their boots. Jason's grip on his gear had tightened. He wasn't hallucinating anymore, but he wasn't grounded either. He wasn't sure who Echo was. Or worse, who he had been programmed to believe she was. They crossed under an old metal beam, partially collapsed and rusted. Jason glanced up and saw numbers scorched into the steel. E509432. His own designation, buried in the structure like a forgotten serial number. He didn't say a word. But Echo noticed him notice. At the cabin, Sima traced her fingers over the map in Langley's notebook. One page showed a tunnel route labeled Vault Path, but at the bottom of the map in red ink were two words circled again and again. False flag. Her heart pounded. She stood quickly, yanking open the main trapdoor and calling down the others. She didn't wait for Echo. She didn't wait for Jason. She was leaving, because something in that journal told her that the vault Jason was chasing wasn't just a destination. It was a kill switch. Jason stopped again as they entered a thinning forest line. They were close to the uplink plateau now, a flat stretch of rocky terrain where the Omega signal first originated. Wind whipped across the stones. And there, resting at the center of the clearing, was a coffin-sized container sealed with layered digital locks. Jason's breath caught. That wasn't just storage, that was containment. And Echo didn't react with surprise. She stepped toward it like she knew it would be there. He didn't say anything, just watched her hand hover over the first lock. And that's when he knew. She was Echo, not the one from the old mission. She had her voice, her walk, her reflexes. But Echo B had died at the end of the Ural breach. He had buried her himself. Whoever this was, she was either an implant, a mimic, or worse. A built memory. He stepped back slowly. She turned, eyes narrowing. "You just remembered something, didn't you?" she asked, her voice calm. Jason didn't move. "You're not her," he said quietly. In the Blacksate trailer, Clemens leaned forward. "He's awake." The tech looked nervous. "Should we abort the embed?" "No," Clemens said. "Let him confront her. If she's real, we'll see it. If she's not, he'll do what E5s were trained to do." "Which is?" "Erase corrupted assets." Jason moved first. He didn't attack, he disengaged, sliding back into a defensive angle just enough to shift the balance of terrain. Echo didn't chase. She just stood there, then said the words that detonated in his skull. "You trained me, Jason. You just don't remember." He froze. His muscles tightened. No hallucination had ever said that before. And the way she said it, it wasn't a command phrase. It wasn't even accusatory. It sounded like grief. Sima and the kids reached the ridge just as the comms tower burst into life, its beacon lighting red, sending a signal directly into the sky. She turned back toward the cabin, then forward toward the valley toward Jason. She didn't know what he was about to do, but she knew the vault wasn't what he thought. And whatever was inside that container, it was alive. Jason stood before Echo, or whatever she was, and looked at the container. "You knew it was here," he said. She nodded. "You led us here." "No," Jason replied. "I was led." She tilted her head. "You think I'm the trap." Jason's eyes burned. "You're the trigger." Then he stepped forward and placed his hand on the container. Inside the Blacksate, alarm screamed. "Container 0 has been touched. DNA match confirmed. Opening sequence initiated." Clemens stood still, her face pale. He activated the sleeper. The container hissed. Gas expelled from the side vents. The locks retracted, one by one. Jason stepped back. Echo didn't move. Inside wasn't a weapon or tech. It was a body, cryogenically sealed. His own face, but younger and angry. Jason fell back 3 steps. The container lights flickered and then died. The younger version of him inside didn't move, but the scanner on the interior glass read one word in red. "Awaiting transfer." Echo finally spoke. "You were the backup, he was the original." Jason didn't blink, didn't breathe. The whole world seemed to drop into silence. He looked at her, looked back at the frozen face in the case, then down at his own hands. The hallucinations weren't glitches. They were attempts to override him. He wasn't the only Jason Statham. He wasn't even the first. Dr. Clemens ran from the trailer, headset still crackling. "Do not let him complete the transfer," she screamed into comms. "He'll destabilize." But it was too late. The glass on the container began to glow. Jason's fingers twitched. The vault was him, and the other him was waking up. Jason Statham didn't move. The wind slid across the high plateau, dragging thin frost over the stones and brushing past the open container where the younger version of him, eyes still closed, took his first slow breath in 16 years. The world didn't crack open. It just held its breath. The words still echoed in Jason's mind like gunshots on repeat. "You're not the original." And beside the vault, Echo didn't step forward to explain. She didn't gloat. She didn't retreat. She just watched, waiting to see which version of Jason would survive the realization. Jason blinked. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from something deeper. The voice was still whispering inside him, not as memory but as command. In the mobile command trailer, Clemens adjusted her headset and stared at the neural feed. Jason's pattern was fragmenting, not dying, not hallucinating, splitting. Left brain rejecting the message, right brain accepting it. Identity fracture. Exactly what they'd coded into E5. The tech turned pale. "He's going to overwrite." Clemens didn't answer. She watched the younger Jason's biometric signature begin to spike inside the container. And then it dropped. The younger version's eyes shot open. They didn't scan or blink. They locked straight onto the standing Jason, like they had never stopped looking at him, like this had only been a pause between thoughts. Jason stumbled back, boots grinding against the frost. He raised one hand, slow, unsure of what he was reaching for, his weapon or the truth. The younger Jason stepped out. No clothes, no emotion, muscles leaner, eyes colder. He didn't speak. Jason did. "Who are you?" But the younger version didn't respond. He looked down at the ground, then up at the sky. Then pointed. Jason turned his head, just in time to see a flare rise over the western tree line. Bright red. Someone had triggered the fracture protocol. At the cabin, Sima saw it too. She grabbed Langley's book, clutching it tight to her chest. The other kids froze. No one knew what the flare meant, but they all felt it. She didn't explain. She just started running. Toward Jason. Echo stepped between the two Jasons, not in fear, but as if she were the only one who understood what came next. She placed her hand gently on the younger Jason's shoulder. And Jason saw something he couldn't explain. The younger version flinched. Not violently, not defensively. Humanly. Jason's mind spun. This wasn't a programmed response. This wasn't AI or mimic code. The younger one didn't know why he was awake. Echo whispered something to him. Jason couldn't hear it. But it calmed the copy. And that made it worse. Because why would the original need calming down? In a secure chamber miles beneath the mountain, a single door unsealed for the first time in 14 years. Inside were 6 chairs. 5 were empty. The 6th began to recline as Unit R2 activated. Inside that body was another Jason, the reactionary build. Built not to replace E5, but to suppress both him and the original if either went rogue. Now all 3 were active, and only one would be allowed to remain. Jason paced backward from the plateau, hands up, eyes darting between Echo and his younger self. The cold didn't register anymore. He finally said it out loud. "If I'm not the first, why do I remember things he does?" Echo turned slowly. "Because memories don't prove identity, they prove intention." Jason clenched his fists. "What does that even mean?" But before she could answer, the tree line exploded. Flashes of movement of black-suited agents, not from Clemens's team. They weren't there to observe, they were there to extract. Jason ducked low, rolled behind a boulder and reached for his old sidearm, but the holster was missing. The younger Jason didn't move. He just watched them come. And Echo. She pulled her blade. She was ready. Gunfire cracked across the stones. Echo moved like shadow, slicing behind the first agent before his trigger could rise. Jason swept a loose pipe from the frost and charged forward. The younger Jason didn't join in. He simply walked forward. Bullets curved, missing him by inches. They weren't targeting him. Jason noticed too late. The agents weren't there to stop the vault from opening. They were there to kill Jason, the one outside the chamber. Echo caught one of them mid-strike and threw his body against a rock. Jason disarmed another, but not before taking a blade across the shoulder. Blood sprayed, he dropped to one knee. The younger Jason stood still. Then finally he spoke. "They're not after me, they're after you." Jason spat blood. "I noticed." Echo moved fast, grabbing Jason under the arm and dragging him behind a metal ridge. He pressed against the wall, breath shallow, blood dripping into the snow. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded. We're both awake now, aren't we? Echo said nothing. The younger Jason was walking away, toward the flare's origin. Jason called out, voice cracked. Where are you going? The younger one turned just slightly. To remember who I am. Down in the mountainside vault, Clemens watched the feed blank. The neural sync had snapped. All three signals, Jason, E5, and R2, had disconnected. It meant the protocol had succeeded. It also meant none of them were under control anymore. She leaned forward, eyes wide, voice tight. Pull the Blacksay team, everyone now. The tech stammered, we'll lose tracking. Clemens whispered, we already did. Jason leaned back against the rock wall, clutching his arm. Echo crouched beside him, wiping blood off his face. She said something, but he couldn't hear it over the ringing in his ears. He looked up at the sky. The flare was fading. But now the stars weren't right. They weren't stars. They were beacons. Old military satellites from the Omega era. And one of them had just shifted orientation. Jason looked at Echo. Did you see that? She nodded. It's not over. Jason pulled himself up. No, it's just starting. Jason Statham moved through the pine-blasted gully like a hunted man wearing someone else's skin. Echo followed close behind, her blade still drawn, but now tucked low against her hip. The wound on Jason's shoulder had dried into his shirt, but the ache pulsed with every step, not just from the injury, from the fracture in his mind. The plateau behind them was silent. The younger Jason, the original or something close to it, had disappeared into the forest, walking toward the flare like it was home. But it wasn't the flare that haunted Jason. It was the satellite shift. A signal had been received. And he knew the Omega satellites weren't just observation. They were response systems. 10 kilometers east, a dormant radio tower clicked to life for the first time since 2011. Snow slid off its old dish as it turned toward the western range. Inside the mountain, Unit R2, Jason's failsafe copy, was already moving through the decommissioned tram tunnels, fully armed, fully activated. He wasn't heading for the flare. He was heading for the signal source, Jason himself. There was only room for one operating signature. Only one code could remain in the system. Jason stopped when he heard boots behind him, more than echoes. They both dropped behind a fallen tree just as a squad of 6 Blacksay hunters moved through the trees. Their rifles weren't up. They were searching. Echo leaned in. Not local, she whispered. Jason studied their gear. No logos, but the boots, foreign military issue, not US. They weren't here for Omega. They were here for what Omega buried. He motioned to move wide, flank them, but Echo shook her head. And then Jason saw what she saw. One of the agents was dragging a body, wrapped in thermal foil. Jason's eyes narrowed. The body was still breathing. They followed the squad for a full kilometer until the group stopped in a clearing, an old listening post Jason remembered from a Cold War training op. The underground bunker had been stripped clean years ago, but the hatch was open again. Inside the bunker, Jason saw movement, a boy's hand reaching up weakly from the edge of a stretcher. It was Echo's brother, the same one she'd sworn was dead. Echo stepped forward without warning, her knife glinted. Jason grabbed her arm. Not yet. But she was shaking. Not dead, she muttered. Jason didn't stop her, he moved with her. They hit the bunker fast, Jason dropping 2 with blunt strikes while Echo went for the lead officer. A short, vicious fight. Clean, tactical. By the time the dust settled, 3 agents were down and the other 3 had bolted into the trees. Echo ran to the stretcher. The boy's face was pale, but his eyes opened as she touched his cheek. She froze. Jason stepped closer. But the boy didn't say her name. He said Statham. Jason stared. You know me. The boy nodded. They said you'd come. At the Blacksay, Dr. Clemens watched the recon drone feeds flicker with static. One of the satellites had begun deploying subroutines not seen since the Montenegro incident. It meant only one thing. Omega wasn't trying to extract anymore. It was preparing for a reset. She keyed into command. Fracture is no longer containable, requesting permission to initiate Ghost Protocol. The voice on the other end was silent for 5 full seconds. Then came the answer, denied, observe only. Clemens swore under her breath. Jason helped the boy sit up slowly. His body was weak, trembling from whatever chemicals they'd used to keep him under, but his memory was sharp. "They used my voice to control the other units," the boy whispered. "I didn't know what I was saying. They made me say it." Echo clenched her jaw. She was holding back tears, but Jason was already thinking 4 steps ahead. "How many units?" The boy looked at him. "They said there were 4 operational. One just woke up." Jason's pulse jumped. 4 versions. So far they'd seen 2, himself and the original. Now R2 was on the move. And there was one more. They moved the boy into a makeshift sled and began dragging him across the snow toward a safer ridge. But night was crawling in, fast and sharp, and the sky had started to hum, low, metallic, almost like pressure on the back of the neck. Jason stopped mid-step and looked up. The stars were tracking. Not visually but aligned, 4 lights, 4 positions. And now they weren't stars. They were orbital weapon drones. The Omega system wasn't just waking up units, it was aiming. Echo whispered, "They're targeting identities." Jason turned. "What?" "Each drone tracks a neural ID signature. That's why they're circling." Jason looked back at the boy. "Do you have a signature?" He shook his head. "They erased mine." Jason nodded. Echo asked, "What about you?" Jason didn't answer. Because he already knew. He was the anchor ID. Every Omega trigger depended on his signal to activate. If they killed him, the system would collapse. But if he killed the others first, he could shut it down. Behind them, a rumble cracked through the trees. Echo turned. Jason didn't need to look. It was R2. The 4th version hadn't arrived yet, but the enforcer was already on the ground, hunting. Jason whispered, "Move." They dragged the boy across the snow into the ravine below, just as a flash of blue light burst behind them, a sonic marker. R2 had pinged their position. Jason stopped short at the edge of the drop. He turned to Echo. "This ends before the 4th wakes up." She didn't argue. Jason handed her the sled rope. "I'm going back." Echo reached for his arm. "You're not ready." Jason met her eyes. "I was never the original, but I'm the only one still choosing what happens next." He turned and walked back into the trees. As the sky above began to glow, Jason Statham moved like a ghost between the trees, body low, steps silent, every instinct locked to the pulse of the hunt. He was bleeding, his mind fracturing under truth and betrayal, but none of that mattered now. R2 had been released. The Omega satellites were tracking neural signatures, and somewhere out here, the last version was waking. Jason didn't know who he was hunting anymore himself, or the thing they made in his image. The snow had stopped falling, but the air carried an electric charge. Something was watching. He adjusted his grip on the blade Echo had slipped him before he left. It wasn't just for survival. It was for identity. On a distant ridge, R2 stood completely still. He wasn't moving like a soldier. He was listening to the trees, to the satellites above, to the resonance of the neural net now collapsing around them. Then he moved, not toward Jason, but toward the bunker. He was going for the boy. Echo didn't wait. She pulled the sled harder, moving through the rock cleft to a narrow path she remembered from her recon years, a forgotten communications trench that led behind the comms tower ruins. The boy was whispering things again, random phrases. Not in fear, but like he was reading code aloud. Echo looked down. "Where did you learn that?" He didn't answer. Instead, he looked up at her and smiled faintly. "They left one more inside." Echo stopped cold. "What?" The boy's voice was clear now. "They didn't just make you watch, Echo. They made one of you too." Jason reached the coordinates burned into his memory, the first fireline drill site from the Montenegro War Games. It was a place only he knew, a ghost zone. But someone was already there. The flare on the ground pulsed red. Static flickered from a device embedded in the soil. Jason stepped closer and saw a voice recorder blinking. He picked it up. Hit play. A voice spoke. "They told you R2 was the failsafe. He's not, you are." Jason staggered back. Another voice played his own. "You volunteered for fracture. That's why you're breaking. That's why they're hunting." Jason crushed the recorder under his boot. This wasn't memory. It was programmed guilt. Back in the ravine, Echo heard the first shot. Not close, but not far. She grabbed the sled rope and ran. Behind her, the boy whispered again, "Don't let him see the girl in the mirror." Echo didn't ask, she just ran faster. Because some truths should stay buried. Jason reached the bunker and saw the door open. No lights, no guards. Just darkness. He moved slow, blade drawn, senses wide. Inside, the air changed, colder, cleaner. He stepped onto a grated floor and turned a corner. And stopped. There was a mirror. Not a reflection, a projection. His face split down the middle, one half smiling, the other scarred. A voice played again. Not a recording. Real time. Jason Statham has arrived. Command code, SD8 fragment detected. Initiating collapse sequence. A panel slid open. A chamber rose. Inside, not a Jason. A girl. 13, eyes open, wires plugged into her spine. She looked at him like she'd seen him in her dreams. She whispered one word. "Dad." Jason fell to his knees. He didn't know her face, but something in him cracked. She looked like someone who once mattered. Like the past he'd buried wasn't actually past. He reached forward, hand trembling. But before he could touch her, everything shook. R2 hit the ground above them like a missile, ripping open the ceiling, boots crashing through stone and steel. Jason dove, pulling the girl behind him. R2 dropped in a blur of muscle and gunmetal, scanning, targeting. Jason rose, bloodied, broken, blade in hand. He didn't speak. Neither did R2. They just moved. It wasn't a fight, it was collapse. R2 moved faster, hit harder, but Jason didn't stop. Every strike was a question, who am I? Every counter was an answer, I choose who I am. The bunker exploded with motion, metal slamming, dust rising, bones cracking. Jason pinned R2 against the wall, only to be flipped, choked, slammed. The girl screamed. Echo was still too far. Jason reached for the detonator on his belt, backup kill switch. But it was gone. R2 had removed it before they started. This wasn't about death. It was about memory. Jason gasped, one hand pressed against the control node as R2 bore down on him. And then a shock. From the system. The girl had touched the terminal. Code burst across the wall like wildfire. The control system shifted. R2 froze just for a second. Jason lunged. Blade out. Straight into the neural jack at the base of R2's skull. The enforcer dropped. Twitching, not dead. But overwritten. Jason collapsed to his knees again. Breathing hard. Echo arrived seconds later. She saw the girl first, then Jason. Then the R2 unit still shaking. Jason looked up, eyes glazed. She called me Dad. Echo stepped forward. She's the last one, they kept her for leverage. Jason whispered, or maybe she's the first. The lights in the bunker flickered. The satellites were still tracking. One more version was waking. And this one wasn't on land. Thousands of miles above Earth, one of the orbital systems began to glow brighter than the others. It didn't move like a drone. It moved like it was thinking. Inside, a frozen chamber cracked. Not a man, not a woman. A hybrid. Built from all four. The original mind was Jason S. But the body, something else. Jason rose slowly and looked at Echo. She's coming. Echo looked back at the girl. She's not ready. Jason checked the blade, looked at R2's crumpled form. No one is. The wind above the tree line had changed. It wasn't just colder, it vibrated, like the sky itself was cracking open. Jason Statham stepped out from the ruined Omega bunker with the girl beside him and Echo just behind. Snow dust swirled in slow spirals across the clearing, but none of it touched the three of them. The satellites were locked in. Every motion they made was being cataloged, calculated, not for surveillance, for extraction or deletion. Jason had seen this once before, a night in northern Pakistan. A black site turned to ash. No survivors, no memory. Only difference. This time he was the target. Miles above them, the Omega hybrid stirred. Cryofluid hissed out from beneath its containment shell, dripping into a shallow coil that encased its feet. The brainwave pattern was stable. The body not fully human, not cloned either. The bones were Jason's, the blood was Echo's, and the face didn't match any file on record. Yet it held his memories. It moved with his instincts. And when it opened its eyes, the first thing it whispered wasn't a name. It was a location. The same one where Jason now stood. The hybrid stepped toward the window, and the station began to descend. Jason didn't need sensors to know. He felt it in his ribs like thunder behind the lungs. Echo said nothing. She only watched the girl. The child was silent now. Wires once embedded in her spine had left tiny burn scars, but her breathing was calm, not afraid, not confused. She looked ready. Jason narrowed his eyes. I need to see the schematics. Echo reached into her belt and pulled out a data core. Don't trust it, she said. Jason took it anyway, slid it into the port embedded in his wrist, an old Omega mod he thought he'd burned out. It lit. Schematics unfolded across his vision like a blueprint of a dream he'd never built. It was the fracture protocol, full and uncut. He saw everything. There had never been a backup. Jason had been the primary candidate. The first fracture wasn't mental, it was a directive. A voluntary split of identity, memory, and emotion, designed to make him unpredictable in war and undetectable in peace. But it failed. The mind held too much. So Omega launched the failsafes. R2, the original, the enforcer. But they weren't copies. They were pieces of the same man. Each version had absorbed a trait: aggression, logic, empathy, silence. The one standing here. He was what remained after everything else was taken. Echo looked at him. What do we do? Jason said nothing. He stepped toward the girl and knelt. What's your name? She looked up. They never gave me one. Jason stared into her eyes. Something flickered, not memory recognition. You chose not to be part of it, didn't you? She nodded. Jason stood. She's not like us. Echo raised an eyebrow. What is she then? Jason turned his head slowly toward the sky. She's the reset. At that moment the first tremor hit. The mountain shook, not from above but from beneath. The Omega station had begun releasing gravity anchors. They weren't just preparing to land, they were rewriting the terrain. This place would vanish. The logs would call it an earthquake. But everyone inside the zone would be erased. Jason ran. They moved west toward an old ridge Echo had mapped before the war, a safe zone. But the girl stopped. She pointed east. She's already here. Jason turned. He saw nothing. But the trees leaned the wrong way. And then came the shadow, taller than human but moving like one, a silhouette gliding down the slope, not breaking a branch. The Omega hybrid had touched ground. And it was walking straight for them. Echo pulled her rifle. Jason didn't. He stepped forward. And the hybrid stopped. There was no tension in its body, no hostility. It tilted its head, studying him. Then it spoke. Identity match, 93%. Jason flinched. What's the missing 7? The hybrid's voice didn't change. Conscience. The wind dropped to nothing. Even the birds had vanished. Jason nodded. Then we're not the same. The hybrid raised a hand, not a weapon. But a mirror. A reflective shard pulled from its chest plate. Jason looked. Saw his own face, aged, fractured, hollow. And behind it, the girl. The hybrid turned toward her. She is not part of the program. Jason stepped in front of her. She is now. The hybrid blinked. Then everything changed. It moved. Fast. Jason blocked the first strike, barely. It wasn't fighting to kill. It was fighting to extract. The girl screamed. Echo fired. The shot clipped the hybrid's shoulder. It spun, adapted, recalculated. Jason hit the ground hard. But he didn't let go. He grabbed the mirror shard and stabbed upward. Straight into the hybrid's data port. Static exploded. The sky glitched. And every satellite above them froze. The hybrid staggered. Not dead, but compromised. Jason rolled back to his feet, chest heaving. The girl ran to him, arms outstretched. But just before she reached him, she stopped. Her face changed. Her voice dropped. You weren't supposed to survive this far. Jason froze. Echo raised her rifle again. But Jason raised his hand. No. He looked at the girl. You're not her, are you? The girl smiled just slightly. I'm the part you let go. Jason stepped back. Then everything went white. The light faded as quickly as it had come. Jason Statham stood in silence, alone now in the clearing. The girl was gone. The hybrid's body was gone. Even Echo wasn't there. Just the snow still falling, still quiet. Except something was different. The snowflakes weren't melting on his skin. They were static digital fragments, collapsing code. Jason blinked. His boots crunched, but the sound echoed wrong, like he was inside something. Not real space, not real snow. Then he saw it. The trees were looping, the same bent branch, the same pattern of bark over and over. He was inside a reconstruction. Not a memory. A trap. Inside Omega's final orbital shell, something vast pulsed behind a glass cortex. Not a brain, a sequence. The girl, or what wore her shape, floated now in suspension. Tubes fed into her back. A ring of processors lit one by one. Not powering her. Copying her. A digital seed, encoded with Jason's biological anomalies, fused with Echo's cognitive resistors, and spliced with an unknown vector, something born not from data but choice. A mind designed not to obey. Which meant it had to be erased. Jason walked forward in the looped forest. Each footfall sank through the snow but never touched soil. Then he saw the figure. Not the hybrid. Himself. Younger, bare chest, blood down the arms. The exact pose from his Montenegro mission, the one Omega deleted from the records. The younger Jason stood silent, head tilted, eyes blank. A simulation, a checkpoint. Jason walked up to it, face locked in defiance. The moment he stepped within reach, the double moved. Fast. Faster than R2. Because it didn't have a body to slow it down. The forest dissolved into steel. Now he was inside a chamber, hexagonal walls, floating data cores, light flickering like breath. He hit the ground hard, rolled, came up swinging. But nothing was there. Not physically. Then the voice came. From all sides. You're not a man, you're a decision tree with trauma. Jason stood slowly, blood on his lip, his breathing controlled, mind unshaken. I'm not here to win, he said quietly. And the system responded. That's why you're still alive. Back in the real world, or what was left of it, Echo moved through a collapsing ravine, each step guided by old recon implants she hadn't activated in years. She'd seen the flash from above, not normal EMP, not solar flare. A localized consciousness bomb. Jason hadn't died. He'd been extracted into simulation. But not for interrogation. For selection. The system wasn't trying to kill him. It was choosing which version of him to keep. Echo reached a burned-out control station. The panel was melted, but beneath it she saw the old Omega access ring, a circle of bioports built to sync with legacy keys. She'd removed hers years ago. But Jason hadn't. She ripped the panel open and pulled the connection line. If she could tether herself through his signal, maybe she could interrupt the loop. Or maybe she'd fry her own mind trying. Either way, she moved fast. Jason stood in a blank corridor now. White floor, no shadows. Ahead a door, black, no handle, just a pulse. The voice spoke again. Only one version leaves. Jason looked behind him. The younger version was walking toward him again. This time he was smiling. Not evil, not arrogant. Just empty. Jason stepped to the side, let him pass. The door opened for the younger one. Jason followed close. And just before stepping through, he crushed a chip in his hand. One Echo gave him months ago. She'd called it the mirror spike. He'd never used it. Until now. The simulation trembled. The walls distorted. The younger version staggered. Jason stepped past him, reached the core panel inside the final chamber, and stabbed the spike into the port. The world collapsed inward. Echo screamed. Her body convulsed as she tethered to the connection. Her mind split across pulses of memory, not hers, Jason's, R2's, Echo, S and the girl S. She saw the origin. Not a lab. A battlefield. 16 years ago. A building collapse. Jason buried alive. But he didn't die. The fracture started then. They didn't split him by force. They split him to save him. Each version born from one part that survived. Pain, purpose, rage, and memory. Echo fell to her knees, coughing blood. The link snapped. But she saw something else before it broke. A satellite blinking off. And the girl no longer floating. Now walking. Outside. Jason woke. On his back. Real snow this time. Real pain. He blinked, coughed, and sat up. Echo was slumped beside him, breathing. The hybrid was gone. And so was the girl. Jason stood. Everything in him screamed for rest. But he looked toward the east ridge. Tracks. Barefoot, small, recent. He followed. At the ridge edge, Jason stopped. The sun was rising, red, low, blood-colored, smoke plumed from the mountain's heart. And sitting on a stone, facing away, was the girl. Still, unmoving. Jason approached slowly. She turned, but it wasn't her anymore. The eyes were wrong, too sharp, too old. She spoke without fear. I reset the activation. Jason stared. What are you now? She smiled. Not your daughter. He stepped closer. Then what are you? She looked up. Your shadow. And from behind her, something rose. Another figure. Taller. Older. Jason's voice caught. Because he knew the gait. The weight. The presence. It was him. But older. From the future. From the last simulation. Or something else. He didn't know. But he took one step forward anyway. Jason Statham didn't speak. He didn't need to. His breath slowed, but his body stayed loose, not relaxed, just aware. The girl sat calmly on the stone, her feet dangling, as if the last 9 episodes hadn't happened. But the presence behind her had nothing calm in it. The older figure stepped out fully now. No hesitation. His boots were worn, his coat faded and long. His beard wasn't gray, it was scorched. One eye half-glazed. But it was him. Jason knew it instantly. Because the weight of that man's walk, the silence of it, was only learned by surviving everything. And then still walking. But something was wrong. This older version didn't look surprised to see Jason. He looked disappointed. Echo stirred behind Jason, barely conscious. But she saw enough to raise her hand slightly, not to reach for a weapon, just to feel the ground. It was trembling again, subtly, a new pattern. Something else was coming online beneath them. Not a satellite, not a weapon. A chamber. Jason took one step forward. The girl stood, now flanked by the old Jason. But her face had changed, not physically, emotionally. She looked detached, like someone already playing out the next 5 moves. Her body didn't match her age anymore. The innocence was a costume. Whatever she was now, it had already rehearsed this. And it had no intention of stopping. Below the ridge, the ground buckled in a perfect square. A platform rose, mechanical arms lifting what looked like a stone mausoleum. Dust spilled down its sides. Symbols flickered faintly on the stone, like circuitry etched in old language. Jason had seen that shape once. Deep in Kandahar, after a village was turned to glass in 22 minutes. They never recovered a body. Just pieces of tech. Now it was rising again. The older Jason didn't speak either. He only reached into his coat and pulled out a small metallic capsule like a medical injector, but older, rusted. Jason felt it in his spine, not fear. A memory. Not his, but one of his versions. That capsule was called the separator. It didn't kill. It finalized. Whatever you were before the shot, it locked in. No reversals, no merging, no confusion. You'd either become whole or permanently fractured. Jason stepped forward. The girl looked at him. Your shadow doesn't forgive, her posture seemed to say. And Jason knew it. Because he had carried the same thing. Echo reached her feet. Jason glanced sideways. She nodded once. He moved. Straight at the older version. They collided with a silence that shattered wind. Fists moved like thunder, no wasted motion, no pauses. Jason's elbow landed first. The older version pivoted with the momentum, driving a knee toward Jason's ribs. Jason ducked, spun, grabbed the capsule. But the older one let it go, almost as if he wanted him to take it. Jason paused. That was the mistake. The older version landed a punch, so clean it shook Jason's vision. Then whispered something only he could hear. Jason dropped. Echo fired. The girl ducked low and vanished into the mausoleum. The door sealed. Jason lay still, the capsule pressed into the snow beside his bleeding hand. But he didn't black out. He was still awake. Just somewhere else. Inside the mausoleum, the girl stood in front of a circular core. The lights were ancient orange, flickering like candles. Her fingers hovered over the activation rings, not buttons, not code. They responded to intent. She had enough of Jason's mind in her to trigger it. And she did. The sky snapped into darkness. The sun vanished behind a false eclipse. All satellite pings went dead. Then a pulse erupted from the ridge, silent but enormous. Every device, signal, tracker, drone, or satellite that had ever touched Jason's biology was erased. The world didn't blink. But the people hunting him felt it like a funeral bell. Jason rose slowly, blood down his chin. The older version was gone. Not dead, just no longer needed. He looked toward Echo. She was sitting now, holding her ribs, eyes scanning the mountain. Did she activate it? Her posture asked. Jason nodded once. Then turned away. They walked down into the valley. Nothing moved now, no more noise. The mountains looked the same, but they were. Jason could feel the shape of his memory changing. The parts that had been blurred, the years in shadow ops, the clones, the trials, the names he forgot, they were real now, unaltered. But that meant something else. If his memories were real, then someone else's were too. And not everyone would survive that kind of clarity. 2 weeks later, at a blacksite off Argentina's coast, a quiet man lit a match and stared at a sealed cryopod. Inside it, another body. Label Statham Echo 3. Eyes open. Not breathing. But not dead. He whispered to no one in particular. He wasn't the only one who fractured. Then closed the hatch. Elsewhere, in a refugee town rebuilt outside Prague, a mechanic found a folded note taped inside a shipment of stolen hardware. It read, "There's a man you'll meet in 14 days. He won't know why he's there, but you will. Give him the wrench and don't ask what it's for." It was unsigned, but the ink smelled like omega resin. Back in the valley, Jason Statham stood on a ridge, watching the wind move ash through the trees. He didn't speak, didn't move. He just watched. And somewhere far above, a red blinking light reappeared on a dormant satellite grid. It didn't track him. It waited. Because Jason wasn't finished. He'd only just remembered who he was.